Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, the channel where we ask one simple question and then follow it all the way down. What if? Today's story is one of the warmest we have ever told. What if James and Lily survived and raised Harry and Hermione together? Before we dive in, if these stories mean something to you, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a single one. Settle in, get comfortable. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The cost of surviving. The cottage in Godric's Hollow smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon, and James Potter was losing a war against a pumpkin. He had carved the thing freehand, refusing Lily's offer of a stencil on the grounds that a marauder did not need a stencil, and now the jack-o'-lantern grinned up at him with one eye twice the size of the other and a nose that had collapsed entirely into the gourd. Harry sat on the kitchen floor in a knitted jumper the color of marigolds, banging a wooden spoon against an upturned pot and shrieking with the particular joy of a child who has discovered that the world makes noise when you hit it. "There," James announced, lifting the lantern so its candlelight wobbled across the ceiling. "Behold, a masterpiece. It looks like Sirius after a bad night," Lily said from the stove, not turning around. "It looks distinguished. It looks like it's been hexed." She tasted the soup off the back of a spoon and added a pinch of something from a jar without measuring, by instinct and old habit, as she had always cooked. Her red hair was loose down her back, and there was a streak of flour across one cheekbone that James had decided not to mention because he liked it there. "Don't show our son. You'll frighten him." Harry, addressed, looked up and beamed. At James's untidy black hair already, a small storm of it, in Lily's eyes that startling green, and when he smiled the whole kitchen seemed to lean toward him. James set the lantern on the windowsill, scooped Harry off the floor, and held him up against the glass so they could look out together at the dark lane and the few lit windows of the village beyond. "That's the world, Harry," he said quietly. "All of it, out there. You're going to give it absolute hell one day." Harry grabbed his father's nose. It was the last day of October, and the war had been going badly for so long that an evening like this one had begun to feel like something stolen. A coin slipped from a pocket while no one was looking. They had been in hiding for the better part of 3 months. The Fidelius Charm sat over the house like a held breath, and the only people in the world who knew where the Potters slept were the three of them, Albus Dumbledore and the Secret Keeper. About the Secret Keeper, James did not let himself think too closely. He had argued for Sirius, loud and certain, and then at the last moment they had changed the plan and told no one, because Sirius himself had pointed out that he was exactly who everyone would expect, and the safest lie was the one nobody thought to question. So they had given the secret to Peter instead. Small, anxious, loyal Peter, who flinched at loud noises and had cried at their wedding and would never in 1,000 years be suspected of anything at all. It was a good plan. James had told himself so 100 times. "He's tired," Lily said, coming to stand beside them. She brushed her thumb over Harry's cheek, and he turned his face into her hand and yawned enormously. "Bath, then bed. And then I'm going to sit down and not move for an hour, and you are going to bring me the rest of that wine." "I'll bring you the whole bottle," James said. "I'm generous like that. It's one of my best qualities." "It's your only quality. Lily Evans, Lily Potter," she corrected, and kissed him, quick and warm, with the soup still going on the stove behind her, and that was the moment James Potter would remember for the rest of his long life as the last unbroken one. Not because anything in it was remarkable, because nothing was. Because the soup was good, and his wife smelled of cinnamon, and his son was warm against his chest, and he had not yet learned how much a single hour could be made to hold. The gate did not creak. That was what told him. The gate at the bottom of the garden always creaked. James had been meaning to oil it since August and had not, because they could not exactly send out for hinges while in hiding, and so the creak had become a thing he relied on without knowing it, a small bell that rang whenever the world came up the path. The night Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow, the gate did not creak, and James, halfway up the stairs with Harry in his arms and a rubber duck in his fist, felt the wrongness of the silence land in him like a stone dropped down a well. He stopped. Through the front window, past his own collapsed jack-o'-lantern, a figure stood at the edge of the garden where the lamplight gave out. It was very tall and very thin, and it did not hurry, and the moment James saw it the candle in the lantern guttered and went black, and every other light in the cottage seemed to dim a half-shade, the air going thin and electric the way it did before a storm broke over the sea. "Lily," he did not shout it. His voice came out low and flat and certain, the voice he had learned in 2 years of being an Auror, the voice that meant the thing they had feared every night was now standing in the garden. "Lily, it's him. Take Harry and go. The flu, go." She was already moving. That was the thing about Lily that James would spend the rest of his life being grateful for, the thing no amount of love had prepared him to expect. She did not waste a single second on disbelief. He crossed the room and took Harry out of his arms, and for one heartbeat the three of them were pressed together in the dark, their son between them, and then James pushed his wand into his wife's free hand because his own was already up. "James, come with us. Someone has to slow him down." He was unbuttoning his cuffs, pushing up his sleeves, the useless little rituals of a man making himself ready. "Get him upstairs, the ward, Lily, the one you built, if it comes to it. It won't come to it." If it comes to it, he said again, and met her eyes, those green eyes she had given their son. You use it, you promise me. She did not promise. She held his gaze for 1 second longer than they had, and then she turned and ran for the stairs with their child against her shoulder, and James Potter turned to face the front door of his home with nothing in his hands at all. The door did not open so much as cease to exist. There was a sound like the world clearing its throat, and the heavy oak was simply gone, blown into a fine bright dust that hung in the air and caught the last of the light, and through the empty frame stepped the thing that had been hunting them since before their son was born. Up close, Lord Voldemort was almost ordinary, and that was the worst of it. Tall, yes. Pale, yes, with a face that had begun to lose the architecture of a human one, the nose flattening towards something serpentine, the eyes red as a struck match. But he was a man-shaped thing standing in James's hallway with rain on his black robes, and he looked at James the way a person looks at a lock they intend to break. Stand aside, Voldemort said. His voice was high and cold and almost gentle. I have not come for you. Stand aside, and you may yet keep your life. I am not unreasonable. This is my house, James said. It is a pile of stones. It's my house. He had no wand. He had a rubber duck still in his left fist. He realized ridiculous, and he let it fall, and he raised his empty hands the way a man does who has decided to make himself the biggest obstacle in a small space. And my son is upstairs, so you'll forgive me if I don't move. Something flickered across Voldemort's ruined face, not pity. Curiosity, maybe, the cool interest of a creature who genuinely did not understand why a wandless man would stand in a doorway to die. Gryffindor, he said, as if naming a disease. You will throw your life away for nothing. There is no spell in your empty hands. No, James agreed, but there's me. And he moved. He had no chance, and he knew it, and he did it anyway, because every second he kept those red eyes on him was a second Lily had to finish her work upstairs. He went low and fast, the way Sirius had taught him in 100 drunken brawls, and the way the Oracle had taught him sober, inside the arc of the wand before it could come down, and for half a heartbeat he had a fistful of black robes and was driving the Dark Lord back into the doorframe by main strength, and Voldemort made a sound that might have been surprise. Then the curse took him. It was not the green light. The green light James had braced for, almost wished for, the clean ending. Instead, a force like a breaking wave caught him across the chest and flung him the length of the hall, and his shoulder met the wall, and something in it gave with a wet, wrong crunch, and the floor came up and struck him, and then a pain arrived that had no name James knew, a pain that turned every nerve in his body to a wire pulled white-hot. He heard himself screaming from very far away. The Cruciatus held him pinned to his own floorboards while the cinnamon smell of his kitchen turned to ash in his mouth, and through the red ruin of it he saw the black robes step over him, unhurried, and begin to climb the stairs toward his wife and his son. Get up, he told his body. His body did not answer. Get up, Lily, get up. He could not. He lay broken at the bottom of his own staircase, and he heard the bedroom door above him open, and he could do nothing at all but listen. Lily Potter had Harry in the corner of the nursery behind the cot, and she was not crying because she did not have time. She had built the ward in August. She had told no one, not even James, the whole of it, because the whole of it was a thing she had found in a book Dumbledore did not know she owned, an old and disreputable book about the kind of magic that the Ministry filed under categories like unwise and forbidden and do not. It was blood magic. It was older than Hogwarts. Worked on a principle that the cleverest curse breakers of the age had decided was a sentimental misreading of the source material, and Lily Evans, who had been told her whole life that she was clever in a way that made people uncomfortable, had read it 3 times and thought, no, they've got it backwards. The principle was this. The deadliest magic could not be undone, but it could be redirected, and the only thing in all the world strong enough to redirect it was a sacrifice freely given out of love. Not a trade, not a bargain struck under a wand, a gift offered with nothing asked in return by someone who meant it all the way down. The book called it many long Latin names. Lily, working alone at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with Harry asleep upstairs, had come to call it something else. The loophole, love was the loophole. The one door the killing curse had been built without a lock for, because the men who built it could not imagine anyone walking through it on purpose. She had keyed the ward to Harry's blood and her own and laid it sleeping in the floorboards and the walls of this room, and it needed only one thing to wake. It needed her to mean it. The door opened. Not Harry, she said. She stood between the cot and the thing in the doorway, James's wand in her hand, and she did not raise it because she understood now that the wand was not the weapon she had brought to this room. Please, not Harry, take me, kill me instead. Stand aside, foolish girl. The red eyes moved past her to the child in the corner, and there was a hunger in them that had nothing to do with hate, only with arithmetic, with a prophecy and a number and a problem to be solved. Stand aside now. Take me instead. I'm asking you. I'm begging you. She let the wand fall from her fingers. It clattered on the floorboards, and the sound of it was very loud. She held her empty hands open at her sides, the same posture James had taken below her, the two of them bookending the same terrible night with the same refusal. Kill me, not my son, have mercy, not Harry, please. Very well, said Lord Voldemort, who did not understand the loophole either, who had spent a lifetime making himself deathless precisely because he could not conceive of a person choosing to die. If you insist, and he killed her. That was what he believed he did. The green light filled the nursery, and Lily Potter felt it touch her, and in the last clear instant before it would have stopped her heart, she did the thing the book had told her was impossible, the thing the clever men had decided was a metaphor. She did not flinch from it. She opened herself to it all the way down, every door in her flung wide. Take it, take all of it, only not him. And the ward she had laid in the walls of her son's room woke at last and recognized what it had been built to recognize, and it did not let her die. It used her instead. The curse meant for Lily struck the love she had made of herself and could not pass through it, and it turned. Magic that had never been turned in 1,000 years of casting folded back along the line of its own intent, and Lord Voldemort, who had aimed death at a child and his mother both, met the whole of it coming home. The nursery came apart. The window blew outward in a single sheet of light. The cot splintered, the walls cracked from floor to ceiling, and Lily was thrown backward off her feet and into the broken plaster, and the last thing she saw before the world went white was her son, sitting up among the wreckage of his cot, very small and entirely unharmed, with a thin cut opening on his forehead in the exact shape of a stroke of lightning, beginning, very loudly, to cry. Where Voldemort had stood there was a column of fire that was not fire, black and screaming, that tore upward through the ruined ceiling and out into the rain and was gone. His robes fell empty to the floor. His wand rolled into a corner. And somewhere underneath the wreckage, in the place where a body should have been, there was only a smear of ash and a wrongness in the air, a thing that had not been killed because it had long ago arranged not to be, fleeing now formless into the dark, leaving the husk of itself behind. It left something else behind too, a splinter, a passenger. But that the world would not learn for years, and Lily Potter, lying broken under the plaster with her ears ringing and her magic burned down to nothing, knew only that her son was crying, which meant her son was alive, and she began, on hands and knees through blood and ruin, to crawl toward the sound. Sirius Black arrived 11 minutes later on a flying motorcycle, and the first thing he saw was the roof of the cottage open to the sky. He had felt it go wrong, he could not have said how. He had gone to check on Peter at the safe house and found it empty, the door swinging, no sign of struggle, no sign of anything, and the absence had hit him harder than any scene of violence could have, and he had been on the bike and screaming north before he had finished the thought. He came down in the lane too fast and laid the machine over in a spray of gravel and was off it before it stopped moving. James, the front of the house was a hole. He went through it at a dead run, wound up, and nearly fell over the body at the bottom of the stairs. James, no, 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 the body groaned. Sirius dropped to his knees so hard he felt them crack against the floor. James was breathing. James was a wreck, his shoulder at an angle, shoulders did not go, his face gray, his whole body shaking in the continuous, helpless way of a man held too long under the cruciatus, but he was breathing, and his eyes, when they found Sirius, were lucid and full of one single word. Up, James managed. Lily, up, Harry, go. Sirius went up the stairs 3 at a time. The nursery looked like a shell had landed in it. And in the middle of the wreckage, in a circle of clear floor that the destruction seemed to have politely declined to touch, Lily Potter sat with her back against the cracked wall and her son in her lap, and she was rocking him, and she was saying his name over and over, and there was blood in her hair and burns across both her hands, and she was, impossibly, against everything Sirius had braced himself to find alive. She looked up at him. He's gone, she said. Her voice did not sound like hers. Sirius. He's gone, I think he's gone. You're alive. Sirius said it stupidly, like a man translating a foreign sentence. You're, both of you, you're. He looked at the empty black robes on the floor, the ash, the wand in the corner. He looked at the lightning cut on the baby's forehead. He looked at Lily, who had done a thing he did not understand and would not understand for years, and he did the only useful thing available to him, which was to get all 3 of them out of the house before it finished falling down. Hagrid came an hour later, sent by Dumbledore, expecting to collect an orphan and finding instead a family. He wept openly into a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth when he saw the 3 of them alive, and he carried James down to the lane in his arms as gently as a man carries a sleeping child, and he stood guard over them in the rain with his pink umbrella while Sirius's bike warmed up and the first of the order arrived in cracks of apparition. By the time the sky began to gray toward morning, the lane outside the ruined cottage was full of people who had spent 13 years learning to expect bad news, standing about in the wet and the cold and slowly, disbelievingly, understanding that for once, after a very long while, the news was good. James woke in St. Mungo's 3 days later with his arm in a sling of shimmering bandage and his wife asleep in the chair beside the bed. For a while he simply looked at her. The light through the curtains was the thin gray of a November afternoon, and Lily had her head tipped against the wing of the chair and her burned hands wrapped in salve and gauze in her lap, and someone had put a blanket over her, and she was breathing slow and even, and James lay very still and watched her do it, and decided not to wake her for as long as he possibly could. He failed at this almost immediately, because Harry, in a cot at the foot of the bed, sat up and saw his father awake and made the sound of pure delight that only a 15-month-old can make, and Lily came up out of sleep with her wandless hand already reaching, and then she saw James looking at her, and the thing that happened to her face was not something James had words for. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said, and then neither of them said anything for a while. It was Dumbledore who broke it an hour later, arriving without a sound, as he always did, in robes of deep midnight blue, with a paper bag of sherbet lemons in one hand and an expression of warmth that James had trusted absolutely for 10 years and was about to begin very slightly to question. "James," the old man said. "Lily, I cannot tell you what it does to an old heart to see the two of you sitting up." He drew a chair to the bedside with a flick of his fingers and settled into it, and his eyes moved over the three of them, and behind the warmth in them something else was working, some swift and silent calculation that James, lying flat and drugged and grateful, did not yet have the sharpness to name. "The whole of our world is celebrating. They are calling your son the boy who lived. There were owls over Bristol at dawn, I'm told. People who have not lit a candle in a year are dancing in their gardens." "He's gone then," Lily said. "It worked. He's really gone." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. It was a small moment. A lesser observer would have missed it. But James had spent 6 years at school watching this man read a room, and 3 years since watching him send people into danger with exactly the right words, and James saw the pause, the half-second in which Albus Dumbledore decided how much to say, and he felt the first cold finger of doubt touch the back of his neck. "His body is destroyed," Dumbledore said. "That much is certain. Lily, what you did, I have read of it. I did not believe it could be done. You will have to tell me everything in time, every word of that book." He smiled, and the smile was real, and it was also a door closing. "But whether Lord Voldemort is gone in the full and final sense of that word, I confess I am not yet ready to say." The room went very quiet. At the foot of the bed, Harry stacked 2 blocks and knocked them down. "You think he's alive," James said. "I think," said Dumbledore carefully, "that a man who feared death as Tom Riddle feared it does not stake everything on a single body. I think we would be unwise to put away our wands, and I think your son will carry this night with him in ways we do not yet understand." Here he looked for a long moment at the lightning scar on the sleeping baby's forehead, and something crossed his face that James liked least of all, a kind of sorrow that arrived too early, a grief kept ready for a death that had not happened. "I would ask you to bring him to me when he is older, so that I might watch over him, so that I might prepare him for what may yet come." "Prepare him for what?" Lily's voice had gone very level. She had set down her bandaged hands flat on the blanket. "Albus." "Prepare him for what?" "For a hard world," Dumbledore said gently. "Nothing more than that." But it was more than that, and all 3 adults in the room knew it was more than that, and the knowing of it sat in the air between them while a baby played with blocks at the foot of the bed. James looked at his old headmaster, this man he had followed into a war, and understood for the first time clearly that being loved by Albus Dumbledore and being used by him might not be opposite things. The old man had a plan. The old man always had a plan. And whatever the plan had been, it had counted somewhere in its arithmetic on a column under the heading of the Potters that now would not add up, because the Potters were supposed to be a name on a memorial, and instead they were sitting up in a hospital bed, inconvenient, alive, and watching him. "We'll raise our son ourselves," James said. "Thank you, but we'll be doing that part ourselves." Dumbledore inclined his head, and his smile did not change, and that was somehow the most worrying thing of all. "Of course," he said, "of course you will. I would expect nothing less of you." He rose and set the bag of sherbet lemons on the bedside table, and at the door he paused. "There is one more matter, a happier one perhaps." Sirius Black. James's good hand closed on the blanket. "What about him? He came to me last night in a state I have rarely seen a grown man reach. He believes he is responsible. He had advised the change of secret keeper, and the change is what undid you." Dumbledore's eyes were grave. "Peter Pettigrew has not been found. There was for a few hours a faction in the Ministry that wished to arrest Sirius on the strength of his being the obvious choice. I told them the obvious choice is rarely the true one, and I told them that the Potters live and can speak for themselves and will speak for him," Lily said at once. "Today. Now. Get us the parchment. It is being seen to." Dumbledore opened the door. "It is a strange gift, you understand. Your survival saves more than yourselves. A dead family cannot testify. The world that mourns you cannot also be told the truth by you. You have, simply by living, pulled a great many threads out of a great many hands." He looked back at them once, and the warmth was there, and the steel was under it, the way iron is under rust, including, I will be honest with you, some of mine. "Rest, both of you. We will speak again." And he was gone, and James lay in the gray light and held his wife's bandaged hand very carefully so as not to hurt the burns, and did not say what he was thinking, which was that they had survived one war and might have just begun another, quieter one, against a man who loved them. They brought Sirius in that evening, and he stood in the doorway like a man at his own sentencing, and then James said, "You absolute idiot, get over here." And Sirius crossed the room and put his forehead down against James's good shoulder and shook, and none of them said anything about it afterward ever, because some things are between brothers and the room they happen in. Miss came the next day, gray-faced and gaunt, 3 days off the full moon and looking it, and he stood at the foot of the bed and said, "I keep thinking I dreamed the owl. I read it 9 times. I thought somebody was being cruel." And Lily got out of the bed she was not supposed to get out of and crossed the cold floor on bare feet and hugged him until he stopped apologizing for things that were not his fault. It came out slowly over those days in the bright cold ward, the shape of what had happened to them. Peter was the traitor, that was the splinter under everything, the fact that reordered a decade of memory. The anxious little friend who had cried at the wedding had sold them for reasons none of them would ever fully learn and had vanished and was out there somewhere wearing the face of a man or the body of a rat, and the war's most loyal-seeming soldier had turned out to be its rot. They grieved that more than they grieved the house. A house could be rebuilt. You could not unknow a thing like Peter. And there was the other thing, the thing they did not say in front of Harry, even though Harry was too young to understand a word of it. The scar would not heal. The Mediwiches tried everything, and the thin lightning mark on the baby's forehead closed and then reopened faintly, like a door that would not latch. And on the second night Lily woke to find Harry whimpering in his cot and the scar standing out livid and hot to the touch. And when she pressed her palm to it she felt, for half a second, something she could not name and did not have the words for and never afterward forgot, a cold like a draft from a room with no fire in it. A presence that was very far away and not, in the deepest sense, gone. She did not tell James for 2 days. When she did, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Then we don't wait for it, whatever it is. We don't sit in a tower and wait for it to come to him." And Lily, who had read 3 times a book about a kind of magic the world had decided was a metaphor and had been proven right, said, "No, we don't wait." That was the first time either of them put it into words, the thing that would shape the next 16 years of their lives. They would not be passive. They would not be protected. They would not hand their son to anyone, no matter how wise, to be kept like a sword in a sheath against a day someone else had chosen. Whatever was coming for Harry would have to come through them, and they intended to spend the intervening years making the wall of themselves as high as love and cleverness and marauder stubbornness could build it. They went home 11 days later, not to Godric's Hollow. That house was a grave with the roof off, and they could not have lived in it. The Potters had old money and older property, and there was a house in the West Country that had stood empty for 2 generations. A rambling stone thing with too many chimneys and a garden gone to wilderness and a single great rowan tree at the bottom of the lawn, and James, sitting in the hospital bed with a property ledger he had summoned from the family vault, had put his finger on the page and said, "Here, we'll go here. Nobody will think to look for the boy who lived in a drafty pile in Devon." It took weeks to make the place fit to live in. Sirius did most of the heavy magic because James's shoulder had not knitted right and would not for months, and there were stairs he could not yet climb, and a tremor in his wand hand from the cruciatus that came and went and would, the healers warned, perhaps never wholly leave. He had been a duelist of some local fame at 21. He was 21 still, and he could not hold a teacup steady on a bad morning, and he learned over that first hard winter to make a joke of it before anyone else could, which is a thing certain men do instead of weeping. But the house came together. Lily filled it with books. Remus brought a battered armchair upholstered in faded green and set it by the library window because, he said, every house needed one chair that an adult could disappear into for an entire afternoon without anyone thinking to look for them there. Sirius built, against all advice, a treehouse in the Rowan which lined, and which he refused to fix on the grounds that the lean gave it character. And Harry, who was too young to remember the cottage or the curse or the thing with red eyes, learned to walk on the wide stone flags of the kitchen, holding onto the legs of chairs, falling over, getting up, while his father watched him from a chair he could not yet rise from quickly, and his mother stood at a new stove and tasted soup off the back of a spoon, and added things from jars without measuring, by instinct and old habit, in a kitchen that smelled, once again, of wood smoke and cinnamon. On the first morning of December, the first snow came down soft over the rowan tree, and James got himself out of bed before anyone else and down the stairs on his bad leg one careful step at a time, and lit the kitchen fire so the room would be warm when his family came down to it. He was the first one down. He decided, standing there with the kindling catching and the snow whitening the window, that he would try to be the first one down as often as he could manage, for as long as he could manage it, because a man who has lain broken at the bottom of his own staircase and listened to his wife beg for their child's life learns the exact and terrible value of an ordinary warm morning, and intends, if the world will let him, to make as many of them as he can. Lily came down with Harry on her hip and found the fire lit and her husband standing at the window in his dressing gown, watching the snow. "You're up early," she said. "First one down lights the fire." He said it lightly, the start of a joke, and then it stopped being a joke somewhere in the middle and became a thing he meant. "I thought I'd like that to be a rule in this house. First one down lights the fire, so whoever comes after always walks into somewhere warm." Lily looked at him for a moment. Then she crossed the cold flags and stood beside him at the window with their son between them, the three of them pressed together in the gray early light, and outside the snow came down over the rowan and the lopsided treehouse and the wild garden, soft and unhurried, covering the world in something clean. "All right," she said. "First one down lights the fire." Harry reached out toward the white window and the white world beyond it and made a sound of wonder, and his parents stood in the warm kitchen of the house where their family would grow, and held him, and held each other, and let the snow fall. The full moon that month came on the 19th, and Remus arrived at the house in the late afternoon with his small case and the gray, worn-thin look that the days before always put on him, and he tried at the door to make the speech he had clearly rehearsed on the train, the one about how he should really find somewhere remote, how he didn't want to bring this into a house with a baby in it, how they had enough to manage. "Remus," Lily said, "there's a cellar. James spent a fortnight charming it. There's a cot down there with a blanket Sirius transfigured out of his own coat, which I personally would not sleep under, but you're braver than me. There's water and there's chocolate, and there are 3 people upstairs who are going to sit up all night whether you like it or not. Come in out of the cold." He came in out of the cold. That was how the ritual began, the one that would run through all the years after like a thread of silver through dark wool. On the full moon nights, the family did not sleep. Sirius went down into the cellar in the shape of the great black dog and stayed with Remus through the worst of it, so that the wolf had company and could not turn its teeth on itself. And James and Lily kept the watch in the kitchen above with the fire banked low and a kettle that never quite went cold. And in the morning, whatever the night had cost, there was chocolate, good dark chocolate broken into rough squares. Because Remus had told them once that it was the only thing that reliably put the warmth back into a man after the moon took it out of him, and the Potters were not a family that forgot a thing like that. On this first night of it, the December moon riding high and hard over the snow, Lily sat at the kitchen table with Harry asleep against her shoulder and listened to the sounds that came up through the floor and did not flinch at them. And across the table James turned his bad hand over and back, watching the tremor come and go in the firelight. "Stop that," she said softly. "You'll wear a hole in it. It's worse on cold nights. The healer said it would be." He flexed the fingers. "I keep thinking about him on the stairs. I keep thinking if I'd had my wand, if I just kept hold of my wand. If you kept hold of your wand, you'd have died with it in your hand, and I'd have buried you, and I would not have had 11 seconds to spare for it because I'd have been busy." Lily's voice did not rise. It never did on the things that mattered most. That was a thing about her that people learned slowly and never forgot. "You stood in a doorway with nothing in your hands, and you bought me the time I needed. Don't you dare turn that into a wound. It's the reason your son is breathing." James looked at her across the table, across the sleeping weight of their child, and the tremor in his hand went still, and he reached out with it and laid it open on the scrubbed wood, palm up, asking for something he hadn't the words for. Lily put her bandaged hand into it. 3 times lightly she pressed his fingers. He never afterward knew if she meant anything by it, and he never asked, but he caught himself doing it back to her for years. 3 small presses that said the thing neither of them said aloud: "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." Then Harry stirred against his mother's shoulder and made a distressed sound and turned his face, and on his forehead the thin lightning scar stood out hot and livid in the low firelight. Lily had her palm against it at once. James was around the table before she finished moving. For the length of a breath the cold came off the mark, that draft from a fireless room, and the baby's face creased toward crying. And then it passed. The scar faded back to a pale line. Harry sighed and settled and slept on, and the kettle ticked on the stove, and down through the floorboards came the long low cry of the wolf, and James and Lily stood close together over their son in the firelit kitchen and did not speak, because there was nothing to say that they had not already decided in a hospital bed. That the thing in their son's scar was not gone, that it would someday come looking, and that when it did, it would have to come through this. Through the lit fire and the banked watch and the chocolate in the morning, through a family that had decided with full knowledge of the cost to be unbreakable on purpose. Upstairs in the rooms they had not yet finished filling, the snow ticked against the glass. Down the lane, the rowan stood black against the white, holding Sirius's crooked treehouse in its arms. And in the warm heart of the house, 3 people who should by every rule of that war have been a name on a stone kept watch over a sleeping child, and waited for the morning and the chocolate and the long good years they had no right to and meant, every single one of them, to live. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Girl in the Rain. By the autumn Harry turned 5, the house in Devon had stopped being a place the Potters were hiding and become, without anyone deciding it, simply home. You could measure the change in small things. The library had eaten 2 of the spare bedrooms and was making designs on a third. There was a worn place on the 3rd stair where a small pair of feet went up and down it 40 times a day, and a worn place in the green armchair by the window that fit exactly the shape of a man who liked to read with one leg up because the other ached when it rained. It rained a great deal in Devon. James had made his peace with this. On Sunday mornings the house smelled of scorched pancakes because James cooked the Sunday breakfast and James could not cook, and had decided with the serene confidence that was his chief inheritance from his own father, that the burnt edge was the best part and anyone who disagreed was welcome to make their own. Harry believed this absolutely. Harry believed most things his father told him, which was a state of affairs both his parents found alarming and were in no hurry to correct. "Secret," James said, sliding a blackened disc onto his son's plate with the air of a man presenting a trophy. "Is the wand work? You've got to flip them with style. Watch." He flipped one. It adhered to the ceiling. Harry shrieked with laughter, which was the actual purpose of the exercise, and Lily, coming in with the post, looked up at the pancake on the ceiling and then at her husband and said, "If that comes down in my hair, James Potter, you're sleeping in the treehouse. You'd miss me. I'd visit." She dropped a stack of letters by his plate and took her tea to the window. "Sirius is coming Thursday. He says he's bringing Harry a present and that I'm not allowed to ask what it is, which means it's alive. Last time it was a Krupp. It dug up the entire vegetable patch and then ate Remus's bookmark." Lily sat on the arm of the green chair and leaned against James's shoulder, and for a moment the three of them were quiet in the steam and the smell of burnt sugar, the rain coming down soft on the window, the pancake holding its position on the ceiling with quiet dignity. This was the thing James had learned to love most, more than the grand moments, more even than the night they had all walked out of that ruined cottage alive, the ordinary Sunday weight of his family leaning on him while the kettle cooled. He had nearly not had it. He never forgot that he had nearly not had it. It made every burnt pancake taste faintly of grace. Harry, 5 years old, with his father's untidy hair and his mother's green eyes and a smear of treacle from ear to ear, looked up from his plate and announced, "I'm going to live here forever." "Good," said Lily and kissed the top of his head. "We were rather hoping you would." That was the autumn. By the spring, everything would be different and better, and the difference would arrive in the rain with a suitcase too big for her and a book held against her chest like a shield. The file landed on Lily's desk on a Tuesday in March. She had taken a part-time post the year before in the ministry's least fashionable department, a cramped office 2 floors below the improper use of magic patrols, where a handful of overworked witches and wizards were responsible for the thing the rest of the wizarding world preferred not to think about: Muggle-born children and the strange, frightening, lonely business of growing up magical in a house where nobody had a word for what was happening to you. Lily had grown up exactly that child. She had been the girl who made flowers open and close in her hand and was called a freak for it by her own sister, and she had never forgotten what it would have meant to have one adult, just one, knock on the door and say, "You are not broken, you are not alone, here is what you are." So when the post came open, she had taken it, over the gentle objections of a husband who pointed out she could have had any research chair in Britain, because some debts you pay forward or you do not pay them at all. The file was thin, most of them were. A name at the top, Granger Hermione Jean, a date of birth that made her 5, nearly 6, and then the facts set down in the flat language the ministry used for the things it found most inconvenient, both parents deceased. A motorway collision on the A40, a wet night, a lorry that had not stopped in time. The Grangers had been dentists, the file noted, though why a profession should explain the size of the hole 2 people leave when they go, it did not say. No magical relatives. The child had been placed provisionally with a great-aunt in Bristol, an elderly woman named Edith who had buried a husband and a sister and had not asked at 73 to bury a niece and inherit the niece's strange and silent daughter in the same fortnight. And then the part that had brought the file across 3 desks and down 2 floors to land on Lily's, the accidental magic. There had been incidents. A window cracked into a perfect spiderweb when the child cried. Every book in the house found one morning, stacked by height in the front hall, though the child was too small to reach the high shelves and swore she had not touched them. The great-aunt's cat had begun refusing to enter the girl's room, and 3 days before the file was written, the great-aunt had woken to find every clock in the house stopped at 11:14, which a ministry investigator had established, with some discomfort, was the precise minute of the collision on the A40. The great-aunt, the file concluded, was unable to cope and had requested alternative placement. There was a list of options below this. Lily read the list. It was the kind of list that made you understand why the department was 2 floors underground. A residential home. A series of Muggle foster placements, none aware of magic, each likely to end the moment a clock stopped or a window webbed. And at the bottom, in a hand that had clearly written it many times before, the words, "Subject may, if no suitable arrangement is found before her 11th year, be retained for monitoring." Retained for monitoring, like a faulty broom. Lily sat with the file for a long time. Then she charmed it to copy itself, put the copy in her bag, and went home early, which she never did. She waited until Harry was asleep. She found James in the green chair with a glass of something amber and a book about defensive warding open face down on his knee, which meant he had not been reading it. He had been doing the thing he did most evenings now, sitting where he could see the stairs, keeping a watch that had no enemy in it anymore and that he could not seem to put down. She sat on the arm of the chair as she always did, and she did not say anything, and after a moment James closed the book entirely and said, "All right, out with it. You've had a face on you since you flew in." She gave him the file. He read it as he read everything that mattered, fast and then slow, once for the facts and once for what was under them, and she watched his jaw work, and she watched him get to the bottom to retain for monitoring, and she watched his hand close on the parchment hard enough to crease it. 5 years old, he said, nearly 6. And the system's plan is to lose her in the Muggle world until she's old enough to put a tracking charm on and then keep an eye on her like she's contraband. That's the plan. James set the file on his knee. He looked across the dim room at the stairs, at the place where 2 floors up, his own son lay asleep under a quilt Lily's mother had made, safe, watched, loved past all reason. Then he looked back at his wife, and Lily already knew, because she had married him precisely because she had known he would, what he was going to say. Well, James said, we've got a spare room. It used to be a library, but the library's a hydra. It'll find somewhere else to put its heads. He turned the glass in his good hand and did not drink from it. She'll be frightened. She'll be angry, probably, and she'll have every right. We don't know the first thing about her except that the world's already decided she's a problem to be filed. He looked up. When can we meet her? Lily put her face down against his hair and did not answer for a moment because her voice was not going to work yet, and James, understanding this, reached up with his bad hand, the one that shook, and pressed her fingers 3 times lightly, the way they did. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Thursday, she said when she could. I'll arrange it for Thursday. Sirius is coming Thursday. Then Sirius can make himself useful and mind Harry. Lord knows it'll be the first time. James laughed low into the quiet and pulled her down off the arm of the chair and into his lap, careful of the leg, and they sat there a long while in the lamplight, not talking about the thing they had just decided, which was the largest thing they had decided since a hospital bed 3.5 years before, and which neither of them, then or ever, regarded as a decision at all. It had not felt like choosing, it had felt like recognizing. Somewhere in Bristol there was a child whose clocks had all stopped at the minute her world ended, and the Potters had a house that ran on the principle that the first one down lit the fire so that whoever came after walked into somewhere warm. There was a child coming after, that was all. They lit the fire. The great aunt's house in Bristol was small and clean and smelled of furniture, polish, and grief, and Edith Granger opened the door in a cardigan buttoned to the throat and looked at Lily and James with the particular exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something far too heavy for far too long and has just been told they can put it down. You're the ones, she said, from the special department. She said special the way another person might say cursed. She's in the front room. She doesn't talk much. She didn't talk much before, her mother said, always had her nose in a book, but since Edith's hand went to her cardigan buttons. She doesn't talk much now at all. Mrs. Granger, Lily said gently, you don't have to explain anything to us. I tried, you know. The old woman's chin came up. I want that written down somewhere. Whatever you write, I tried. But the clocks and the cat won't go near her, and last week the kettle, I can't, I'm too old, I don't understand what she is, and I was so afraid I'd say the wrong thing and make her think. She stopped. Make her think she's wrong, and she's not wrong, she's not for me. She needs people who aren't frightened of her. We're not frightened of her, James said. Edith Granger looked at him for a moment, at this tall young man with a cane and a crooked smile and kind eyes, and something in her face eased a fraction. No, she said, I don't suppose you are. She stepped back from the door. Come in then and be patient with her. She's cleverer than all of us put together, and it hasn't done her one bit of good in this house. Maybe it'll do her some good in yours. The front room had net curtains and a 3-bar fire and a great many porcelain figurines arranged on every surface, and in the middle of it, on a sofa too big for her, sat a small girl with a great quantity of brown hair and a book open on her knees that she was not reading because she was watching the door. She was watching the door the way Lily had once watched doors. The way you watch a door when every adult who comes through it has, lately, brought a fresh disaster, and you have learned that the only sensible thing to do is see them coming. Rain ran down the net curtain window behind her. She had a coat already on, buttoned wrong, one button off all the way down, and a suitcase by her feet that was much too big for her, the kind of suitcase a person packs when they are not coming back, and she held the book against her chest with both arms wrapped over it. Hermione, said the great aunt, these are the people I told you about. They're going to. You're getting rid of me, the girl said. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you read out a fact you have already checked twice. Her voice was clear and precise and far too steady for 6. It's all right, you don't have to do the voice. I know I'm difficult. The cat told you so. The cat is a coward, James said. The girl's eyes moved to him. They were brown and very large and red-rimmed at the edges in the way that does not come from one cry but from a great many of them, spaced out over weeks in the dark into a pillow so that no one will hear. Cats are excellent judges of character, she informed him. It's a well-known fact. I read it in a book. Did the book mention that they're also enormous snobs and frightened of practically everything? James lowered himself with some difficulty and no attempt to hide it into the armchair across from her so that his eyes were level with hers. He propped the cane against his knee. Because in my experience, when a cat won't go near someone, it's usually because that someone is more interesting than the cat can handle. Cats hate that. They like to be the most interesting thing in the room. They can't stand competition. Hermione Granger looked at him very hard, as she would later look at a particularly suspect line in a textbook. "Are you making that up?" she said. "Absolutely," said James. "But it's a better story than the cat S, and you get to choose which story you believe. That's the one thing nobody can take off you. I learned that the hard way." He held out his hand, the steady one. "I'm James. This is my wife, Lily. We've got a house in Devon with a very large library, a treehouse built by a lunatic, and a small boy called Harry who will talk your ear clean off if you let him. Nobody in it is frightened of you. Nobody in it thinks you're difficult, and nobody in it is ever going to file you." The girl did not take his hand, but she did not look away from it either, and that, Lily thought, watching from the doorway with her own throat tight, was where it began, not with a yes. With a child who had learned to see disaster coming, looking at an open hand and deciding, against 6 years of accumulating evidence, to keep looking at it. "I have a lot of books," Hermione said at last. It came out almost a warning. "More than fit in the suitcase. Aunt Edith says they're in boxes in the garage." "We'll need all of them," Lily said. "Every single one. The library has been getting greedy. It could do with someone who knows how to put it in its place." The girl turned to look at her, this red-haired woman in the doorway who had a voice like she meant what she said, and for one moment something flickered across her fierce little face that had been gone from it for a month, a kind of cautious, disbelieving light, the look of a person who has been cold a long time and has just felt, from somewhere, the first edge of warmth. "All right," said Hermione Granger, and stood up off the too-big sofa, still holding her book against her chest, and picked up the handle of her too-big suitcase with a small, white-knuckled hand. "But I'm bringing the cat's box anyway, in case it changes its mind." It did not change its mind, but the girl brought the empty cat box to Devon all the same, and kept it under her new bed for 2 years, and no one in the house ever once asked her to throw it away. The drive home was long because they went by Muggle car for the girl's sake, and it was full of rain, and Hermione sat in the back seat with her book and her seatbelt double-checked and said almost nothing for the first hour. It was the second hour that undid Lily quietly, in a way she did not let the child see. Hermione had fallen asleep against the window, the book sliding from her hands, and James had glanced in the mirror and slowed the car a fraction, the way you do, and Lily had turned to look at her, and the girl had been crying in her sleep. Not making a sound. Just water running steadily down a 6-year-old face that was, even unconscious, set in the rigid composure of a child who has decided that crying is a thing you do where it cannot be used against you. In her sleep she had wrapped both arms around herself, holding herself the way no one had been able to get close enough to hold her, and her lips were moving, and when Lily leaned back to listen she heard the girl saying, very softly over and over, a name. 2 names, Mum, Dad, Mum, Dad. Lily reached back and very gently, so as not to wake her, laid her hand over the child's cold little fist where it gripped her own sleeve. After a moment in her sleep, the fist unclenched and took hold of Lily's fingers instead and held on. Lily faced front again and looked out at the rain and the long gray motorway unspooling under the headlamps, and she did not trust her voice, so she said nothing, and James, who missed nothing, reached over with his bad hand and pressed her fingers 3 times, and they drove the rest of the way home in the dark with a sleeping child holding on to one of them and the other one holding on to him. Harry was waiting on the stairs in his pajamas when they came in, well past his bedtime, because Sirius had comprehensively failed to enforce any bedtime whatsoever, and was at that moment asleep on the sofa with a half-built model dragon on his chest. Harry came down the stairs 2 at a time and then stopped on the bottom one, because there was a girl in the doorway he didn't know, soaked through, clutching a book, with the largest, most watchful eyes he had ever seen. The 2 children looked at each other across the front hall. Lily held her breath. So much, she understood, turned on the next 30 seconds, more than any adult could arrange or rescue. You could open your home. You could fight the ministry and outface a great aunt and drive through the rain. But this, the thing between the 2 of them, the question of whether a grieving girl and a happy boy could find any country in common, this you could not do for them. They had to do it themselves. Harry, 5 years old, considered the situation with the gravity he brought to all important matters. Then he said, "You're wet." "It's raining," said Hermione with enormous dignity, though this was hardly in dispute. "I know, I like it. Dad says it's why everything's green here." Harry came down off the last stair. He looked at the book she was holding the way another child might look at a sword or a wand, with respect for a thing he didn't fully understand. "Is that a good book?" Hermione's arms tightened on it. "It's about dragons," she said in the cautious voice of a person braced to be mocked. "Real ones, the kinds. There's a Welsh green and a Hungarian horntail and a Chinese fireball, and they're all completely different, and most people don't even know that." "There's a dragon on the sofa," Harry said. "Sirius made it. It's only a model, it doesn't breathe fire, but he charmed it so the wings go." He paused, weighing whether to share his most valuable secret with this strange wet girl, and decided with the reckless generosity of the very young that he would. "I could show you, if you wanted, and then tomorrow I could show you the treehouse, except you can't go in the corner because that bit's not safe. Mum says Sirius built it. And there's a chair in the library that you can disappear into for a whole afternoon and nobody finds you. I'll let you have it sometimes, not always, but sometimes." Hermione Granger stood in the doorway of a strange house, soaking wet and orphaned twice over in a month, holding the only thing she had managed to keep, and looked at the small black-haired boy offering her, with the whole of his open and uncomplicated heart, a model dragon and a secret chair. And sometimes, "What's the chair like?" she said. "Green," said Harry, "and enormous, come and see," and he held out his hand. He did not know to do it gently. He was 5, he held it out as he held out everything, all at once, expecting the world to be glad. And Hermione looked at the open hand, the second open hand a Potter had offered her that day, and this time, after a moment that contained the whole long, terrible month behind her, she let go of her suitcase and she took it. Lily turned away then on the excuse of hanging up the coats so that no one would see her face, and across the hall James was suddenly very busy waking Sirius up, and the two children went off toward the sitting room hand in hand, the girl still clutching her dragon book with the other arm, Harry chattering, and that was the beginning of it. That was the beginning of everything that came after, though none of them then could have known how much it would come to mean. A boy held out his hand because he didn't know any better. A girl took it because she had run out of reasons not to. And the house in Devon, which had been built for 3, made room without complaint for a 4th, the way warm houses do. It was not, of course, all mended in a night. There were weeks of it. There were nights Hermione woke screaming from a road and a wet windscreen and a sound she would not describe, and Lily learned to be at her door before the second cry, and to sit on the edge of the bed and not touch her until she was asked, because the girl flinched from hands that came too fast. There were mornings she would not come down, and James would carry up a plate of scorched toast and leave it outside her door without knocking and go away again, and it would be gone an hour later, and that was its own kind of conversation. There was a fortnight in April when she barely spoke at all, and the family let her not speak and set a place for her at every meal anyway, and never once made her account for the empty chair. What brought her back in the end was not the family at all. It was Harry, and it was books, and it was the green chair. She had taken to hiding in the library, which was the one room in the house that made instant and complete sense to her, and Harry had taken to hiding there too, in solidarity, though he could not yet read very well and got bored within minutes, intended to lie on the floor making the model dragon attack his own feet. And one wet afternoon Lily, passing the open door, heard a sound she had not heard from that child once since Bristol, and stopped and looked in without being seen. Hermione was in the green chair. Harry was on the floor at her feet. And Hermione was reading to him, out loud, the dragon book, doing all the voices, and Harry was lying with his chin in his hands gazing up at her with the frank adoration of a small boy who has discovered that the new person knows things. And at some absurd dragon-related plot development Harry had laughed, and then Hermione had laughed too, the sound surprising her even as it came out, a real laugh, a child's laugh, rusty from a month of disuse, and then suddenly free. Lily stood in the corridor with her hand pressed flat against the doorframe and listened to a girl who had stopped every clock in her great-aunt's house learn, in the green chair by the rainy window, how to start her own again. From then on, it was reading aloud. That became theirs, the two of them, before it became anything else. Every evening the green chair, Hermione reading and Harry listening, working their way through the dragon book and then through everything else the greedy library could offer. And when Harry's reading caught up to hers they took turns, a page each, arguing fiercely over the pronunciation of words neither of them had ever heard spoken, and the family learned to leave that chair and that hour alone, the way you leave alone anything that is quietly saving someone's life. Sirius arrived the second weekend in April on the flying motorcycle, which he was not supposed to fly in daylight and flew in daylight anyway, coming down in the back paddock in a great roar of engine and a scatter of startled sheep. And Hermione, who had been in the green chair, came to the library window to see what the noise was and stayed at it, gripping the sill. "That's my godfather," Harry said proudly, appearing at her elbow. "Well, he's mine and now he's a bit yours, probably. He's the loudest person in the world, Mum says so." Sirius Black was a difficult man to remain wary of, which was precisely the quality that had made him so dangerous at school and made him, now, exactly the right person to lay siege to a frightened child. He did not coo at her. He did not crouch down and use the voice, the special department voice, the one Hermione had learned to hate. He took one look at the small brown-haired girl standing in the doorway assessing him like a suspicious customs official, and he grinned and he said, "You're the one who reorganized the entire library by subject and then by date within subject. Remus told me." He nearly wept. He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Is it true you found a mistake in one of Lily's reference books?" Hermione's chin came up a fraction. "The periodic table of potion bases was out of date," she said. "It had moonseed in the wrong column. I made a note." "You made a note?" Sirius put a hand to his heart. "In Lily Potter's book, you corrected Lily Potter. I think I'm in love, and I have excellent instincts about people. Ask anyone." He dropped onto the hearthrug with the boneless ease of a large dog, putting himself below the children's eye level, which Lily noticed and Hermione did not, and produced from his coat a brown paper parcel. "Now, I was told there was a new person in this house, and the rule in this family, which is a very old and serious rule, is that a new person gets a present on the first visit. Harry will tell you, it's tradition, it's practically law. It's not law, said Harry, but it's true. The parcel held a book. Of course it did. Remus had told him what to buy, and Sirius had gone to a shop in Diagon Alley that he privately found terrifying and come out with a battered second-hand copy of Hogwarts. A history, a hand-drawn map of the castle folded into the front, and a previous owner's notes crowding the margins in faded ink. Hermione opened it and went very still and turned the first page and the second and forgot entirely that there were people watching her. "There's a castle," she said to no one. "It's a school in Scotland. It's been there 1,000 years and you can't see it if you're not. There's a hole." She looked up and her eyes were enormous. "There's a whole world, isn't there? This isn't just me. There's a whole world of it." "There's a whole world of it," Lily said gently, "and in 5 years a letter is going to come for you on an owl and you're going to go there and you're going to be, I think, rather frighteningly good at it." Hermione looked down at the book in her lap, the map, the margins, the 1,000 years of it, and then she did a thing she had not done to any of them yet. She crossed the rug and she sat down next to Sirius, close, leaning a little against his arm, and she opened the book between them and pointed at the map and said, "Show me where the library is." And Sirius Black, who had never in his life been anyone's first choice for anything quiet, bent his shaggy head over the map beside hers and showed her where the library was, and stayed there showing her things for an hour and looked up only once at James, with an expression on his face that James had not seen there since before Azkaban-shaped shadows had entered all their lives, the expression of a man who has just been handed something he did not know he wanted. It was Remus who told her the truth in the end because Hermione worked most of it out herself, and it would have been an insult to lie to her. She had been watching him. She watched everyone. It was how she had survived. And she had noticed that Remus Lupin, who came often and was the gentlest adult in her new life, and let her read in his lap and never once told her she used too many long words, went gray and thin and ill on a regular schedule, and vanished for a night each month into the cellar with the door charmed shut, and came up the next day moving like an old man, and that on those mornings there was always chocolate, and that nobody explained any of it. So one afternoon in early May she came and stood in front of Remus with a piece of paper on which she had written, in careful round letters, a column of dates and a column beside it copied from an almanac, and she said, "These are the days you're poorly, and these are the full moons. They're the same days. I checked twice." Remus looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he looked at Lily, who had gone still by the stove, and Lily gave the smallest nod, because this child had earned the truth and would only resent a lie, and Remus folded his hands and said quietly, "Sit down, Hermione. I'm going to tell you something true and a little frightening, and you are going to be the fourth person in this house to know it, and I am trusting you with it because you are clever enough to have found it and kind enough, I think, to keep it. Some men on the full moon are not only men." She did not run, she did not flinch. She listened to the whole of it with her head tilted and her brow furrowed, and at the end of it she was quiet for a moment working through it, and then she said, "Does it hurt, the changing? You always look like it hurts." And when Remus said yes it did, she nodded once, gravely, the grave little nod of someone logging a fact she meant to act on, and said, "Then I'm going to read everything there is about it. There must be a way to make it hurt less." There's usually a way if you read enough, and Remus Lupin, who had spent his whole life being feared by people who found out, put his hand over his eyes for a moment and then drew the girl into a hug, and over her head said to Lily in a voice not entirely steady, "Well, you've gone and got a brilliant one. God help us all." That night, the full moon night, Harry took Hermione up to his room while the adults kept their watch, and he taught her the secret thing, the thing his parents did because she was family now and family knew it. "If you're scared," he said with the enormous seriousness of a boy passing on sacred knowledge, "you squeeze someone's hand 3 times, like this. 1, 2, 3, it means I'm here. You don't have to say anything. Sometimes you can't say anything. So you do that instead, and they do it back, and then you know." He demonstrated on her hand 3 small presses. "Mum and Dad do it. I'm not even supposed to know, but now you know too." Hermione looked down at her hand in his. Then very deliberately she squeezed his back 1, 2, 3, and Harry beamed at her as if she had performed difficult magic, and downstairs the wolf cried out and neither child was frightened because they had each other's hands, and that, turned out, was the whole of the spell. In May, on a Tuesday, the paperwork came through. Lily had pushed it hard. There were forms in the wizarding world for almost nothing, but there were forms for this, ancient ones, and she had filled in every line and stood over the right desks and called in 2 favors, and reminded a junior official of exactly whose son she was raising in the bargain. And on a Tuesday in May an owl came to the breakfast table with a heavy envelope, and inside it a single document with a great deal of sealing wax declaring that Hermione Jean Granger was, by the laws of magical Britain, the lawful and permanent daughter of James and Lily Potter, to be raised, protected, and provided for as their own. They told her at breakfast. Lily had thought hard about how. In the end she just put the document on the table in front of the girl between the scorched pancakes and said, "This is yours. It means you live here, not until something better turns up, not until you're 11, here with us for good." You're ours now if you'll have us, and we're yours, and nobody is ever going to file you again." Hermione read the document. She read it 3 times. They all watched her do it, her lips moving, checking it for the trap as she checked everything, because she had learned that the world put traps in things. And then she looked up, and her composure, the rigid composure of a child who cried only where it could not be used against her, finally and completely fell apart, and she put her face down on the kitchen table between the pancakes and the adoption decree, and sobbed as if something long held shut had finally been allowed to break. And James was out of his chair and around the table before the second sob, and he gathered her up, this fierce, clever girl, off her chair and into his arms. And she clung to his shirt with both fists and cried into his shoulder, and he held her and rocked her and said into her hair, "We've got you. We've got you, B. You're home. You're home now." And over her head he looked at Lily, and Lily looked back at him, and neither of them was in a much better state than the child. Harry, 5 years old, did not entirely understand what was happening, but he understood that it was important, and he understood that his new friend was crying. And so he got down off his chair and came around the table and stood very close and put his small hand on Hermione's back between her shaking shoulders and patted her, the way his mum patted him when he cried, and he said, "It's all right. You can have the green chair always now, not just sometimes, always." And Hermione, with her face still buried in James's shoulder, reached out one hand without looking and found Harry's and held it and held on. Outside the window the rain had stopped. Nobody had noticed it stop. But when Lily looked up, blinking, the clouds had broken over the rowan tree at the bottom of the garden, and a long bar of late sun was coming through onto the wet grass, lighting it up, and she thought, with the part of her mind that was always making note of things to remember, that she would remember this. The day the rain stopped, that was what they would call it, not the adoption, not the paperwork, none of the official words. The day the rain stopped, they called it that for the rest of their lives. Every year on the Tuesday nearest, the family kept it, with a particular cake Lily made and a walk to the rowan tree, and James telling the story, embellished further each time, of the wet day they drove to Bristol and came home with the best thing any of them ever found. The day the rain stopped, Hermione's day. The day the house in Devon, built for 3, admitted that it had really all along been waiting for 4. There was one more visitor that spring, and Lily did not like the timing of it. Albus Dumbledore came to tea in late May, a week after the paperwork, ostensibly to see how Harry was getting on, and he sat in the kitchen and accepted a slice of seed cake and was, as ever, warm and twinkling and full of small kindnesses, and he made Harry laugh with a trick involving a teaspoon, and he asked Hermione very seriously what she was reading, and listened to the entire answer, which took some time, with every appearance of delight. But Lily, watching from the stove, saw his eyes go to the 2 children where they sat together on the window seat, Hermione reading, Harry's head against her arm, the easy, unthinking closeness of them already settled into place after only 2 months, and she saw something move behind the old man's face that the twinkle did not quite cover. A recalculation, a man revising a figure he had thought he understood. "They have taken to one another," Dumbledore observed mildly, stirring his tea. "They have," said Lily. "It is a rare thing, a bond that forms so quickly and so deep, rarer still that it should be so good for both of them." He set down his spoon. "You have done a fine thing here, Lily, finer than you perhaps know. A child like Hermione, alone, untethered, frightened of her own gifts, that is a child the world can lose or can shape into something the world later regrets. You have given her an anchor." His blue eyes came up, and the steel was in them now under the warmth, the way it always was. "And you have given your son one. I had not accounted for that." "Accounted for it," Lily repeated. Her voice was very pleasant. It was the voice she used on junior officials who tried to file children. "In what, Albus?" The old man smiled and did not answer, and reached for another slice of seed cake, and the moment passed, the way his moments always passed, leaving behind only the faint cold sense that somewhere, in some long calculation in a tower in Scotland, a quantity had just changed value, and that the changing of it pleased the Potters more than it pleased him. He left at dusk. Lily walked him to the gate James kept carefully oiled now so that it always creaked, and at the gate Dumbledore paused and looked back at the lit windows of the house, the warm gold squares of them in the blue evening, the small shapes moving behind the glass. "Guard them well," he said, and for once there was nothing under it but an old man's sadness. "Both of them. The years ahead may ask more of those 2 children than either of us would wish. You changed the sum, Lily Potter, you and James, simply by refusing to let go of anyone. I do not always know what the new total is, but against all my long habits I find I am glad you changed it." He went out through the creaking gate and was gone into the dusk, and Lily stood a moment in the cooling dark, turning his words over, finding the warm thread in them and the cold one both, and then she heard, through the open kitchen window, the sound that had become the truest sound in her house. A girl's voice reading aloud, doing all the voices, and a boy laughing. She turned her back on the gate and the gathering night and the old man's riddles, and went inside to the fire and her family and the warm. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The house that love built the years did the thing years do in a happy house, which is to pass without announcing themselves, so that you look up one ordinary morning and find that the children are taller and the rowan tree is heavy with berries and you cannot quite say where the time went, only that it was good and you had it, and that was the whole of the point. There came to be a shape to those years, a calendar the family kept that no almanac would recognize. There was the first snow when whoever woke first lit the kitchen fire. There were the full moons with their long watch and their morning chocolate. There was James's birthday, on which he was traditionally not allowed to cook, and Lily's, on which she was traditionally not allowed to do anything at all, a rule she broke within the hour every single year. And there was the day in late spring, the Tuesday nearest the anniversary, that they called the day the rain stopped, which was Hermione's, and which the family kept more carefully than any other. By the third year of keeping it, the ritual had set into its permanent form. There was a particular cake, a dense dark thing full of cherries that Lily made only once a year, and there was a walk down the wet spring lawn to the rowan tree, and there was James telling the story of the day they drove to Bristol in the rain, which had by now acquired several dragons, a sword fight, and a heroic role for himself that bore no relation to events and that nobody bothered to correct because the corrections had become part of the telling. And there she was, James said on the third year, standing under the rowan with a cherry-stained fork in one hand and the whole family arranged on a blanket at his feet, in the doorway, soaked to the skin, holding her dragon book like a shield, and she looked your mother dead in the eye, 8 years old, no, 6, she was 6. She looked your mother dead in the eye and she said, I'm bringing the cat's box anyway, in case it changes its mind. He pointed the fork at Hermione, and I thought, well, that's it. That one's ours. Anybody who brings the box for a cat that hates her is going to fit in this family perfectly, because we are, every last one of us, exactly that stupid about the people we love. It wasn't stupid, Hermione said from where she sat cross-legged with a book in her lap, because there was always a book in her lap. It was a hedged bet. The expected value was positive. If the cat came round, I had a box. If it didn't, I'd lost nothing but the carrying. She does this, Harry informed the rowan tree with enormous fondness. She makes everything into sums. She did it to my birthday wish. She said I shouldn't tell her what it was because telling reduces the probability, and I said that's not real, and she made a chart. The chart was sound. The chart was about my birthday wish, me, and it was sound. But she was smiling when she said it, the particular smile she had grown into over these years, the one that started off trying to be serious and gave up halfway, and Harry grinned back at her. And Lily, watching the two of them from the blanket with James's bad hand in hers, thought, not for the first time, that whatever else the war had taken and might yet take, it had not been able to reach this. This was theirs. This had been built out of nothing, out of a wet Tuesday and an open hand, and it held. It held in ordinary ways, most of all. That was the thing Lily came to understand about love, raising those two side by side, that it lived in the ordinary or it did not live at all. It lived in the way Harry learned to leave the green chair for Hermione when she came in with that pinched look that meant the world had been too loud, and went and lay on the floor at her feet instead, and the two of them would not even speak, she reading, he building something out of Sirius's old chess set, and after an hour the pinched look would be gone and neither of them would ever mention that it had been there. It lived in the way Hermione, who could not bear disorder, alphabetized Harry's chaos of a bookshelf every few months without being asked and pretended she hadn't, and the way Harry pretended not to notice, and the way they had a whole language of things done for each other and never named. They were not the same, those two. That was what made it work. Harry moved through the world the way his father did, head first and grinning, certain the world meant to be kind to him, because it always had been. He was brave the unthinking way of a child who has never once doubted he is loved. Hermione had come to them already knowing the world could end on a wet road with no warning at all, and she met it the way you meet a thing that has hurt you, with both hands and a plan and a great wall of facts, and underneath the wall a fear of losing what she'd been given that she would not have admitted to under torture. He was her warmth, she was his spine. He taught her that you were allowed to be silly, that not everything had to be earned, that you could simply be glad. She taught him that gladness was a thing worth protecting, that you looked before you leapt, that the people you loved could be kept safer if you were only clever enough about it. Between them they made something that was sturdier than either, and the adults in the house, watching it grow, had the sense and the grace mostly to stay out of its way. James taught them to fly the summer they were 7, and it told you everything about the two of them, how they took to it. He started them on an old training broom in the back paddock, the one with the safety charms layered on so thick it could barely be persuaded to leave the ground, and Harry was airborne and grinning within the minute, low and wobbling and utterly fearless, leaning into the turns before James had finished explaining what a turn was. There was a thing that happened to Harry on a broom that happened nowhere else, a kind of quiet coming over him, the loud bright boy going still and certain in the air, and James watched it the first afternoon and had to turn away and pretend to fuss with the broom shed, because it was his own father he was seeing, dead these 8 years, the same line in the shoulders, the same gift handed down a generation without a word. Hermione hated it. She hated it precisely and articulately and at length. She hated that the broom did not respond to logic. She hated that the instructions amounted to feel it, which was not an instruction, it was an absence of an instruction. It was the kind of thing James said when he didn't actually know how he did a thing, and James did not know how he flew. He simply flew, and this was, to Hermione Granger Potter, aged 7, an outrage against the natural order. She got 2 feet off the ground, white-knuckled, rigid, furious, and came straight back down and announced that flight was clearly a talent and not a skill, and that she would be remaining on the earth where sensible people belonged. James did not laugh at her. That was the thing Lily loved to watch from the kitchen window, the patience that came into her reckless husband when one of the children hit a wall. He sat down on the grass next to where Hermione stood glaring at the broom, and he was quiet a while, and then he said, "You know what it is you hate? It's not the height. You're not scared of falling. You're scared of being bad at it. You've never been bad at anything that's in a book, so you've decided anything that's not in a book is beneath you because that way you never have to be bad at it where Harry can see." He plucked a stalk of grass. "I'm not going to tell you you have to fly. You don't. But I'll tell you a secret about being brave since you're collecting facts. Brave isn't doing the thing you're good at. Anyone can do the thing they're good at. Brave is being rubbish at something in front of people you love and getting back on anyway. Harry's brave on a broom. You'd be braver because it'd cost you more." Hermione looked at him for a long moment, then she picked the broom back up. She never became good at it. She became, through sheer refusal to be beaten, adequate, which in her own estimation was worse than useless, and which James privately considered the most impressive flying he had ever seen, because every inch of it was bought with her teeth gritted against a fear that Harry never had to feel. And the day she finally let go with one hand, 10 feet up, white as a sheet, and did a slow, shaky circle of the paddock and landed without falling off, Harry came howling across the grass and tackled her into a hug before she got both feet down, shouting that she'd done it, she'd actually done it, and Hermione, who had been about to be sick, found herself instead laughing into his shoulder, and James, watching, thought that this exact thing was the whole of what he was for now. Not dueling, not the Aurors. This, standing in a paddock teaching 2 children that the people who love you are the safest possible audience for your failures. Sirius turned up halfway through that flying summer, took one look at the safety charm training broom, and lay down in the grass making theatrical sounds of grief. "A Potter," he said to the sky. "A Potter on a broom with cushioning charms. James, your father is spinning in his grave so fast you could power the village off him. Harry, come here, I'm going to teach you a Wronski feint. It's where you dive straight at the ground and pull up at the last possible second, and everyone watching loses a year off their life." "He is doing no such thing," said Lily from the window without looking up from her marking. "He'll be supervised by you. That's the part that worries me." Sirius did not teach Harry the Wronski feint because Lily came out and confiscated his wand and made him sit, but he sat on the grass with Hermione instead, the 2 of them watching Harry carve his slow, happy circles against the blue, and Sirius, who was not built for stillness, was still for once. "You don't like it," he said to her, nodding at the broom. "Not a question. I'm bad at it. So's most of the world. I'm spectacular at it, and it never once made me happy, if that helps. Your brother up there, he's happy. Look at him. That's a happy person, but it's not the flying that makes him happy. It's that he stops thinking. You and me, B, we never stop thinking. It's a curse. It's the family curse, the real one." He bumped her shoulder with his. "You know what you're good at that he'll never be. You watch. You watched me walk in just now, and you'd already clocked that I came on the bike and not the flu because there's road dust on my left side, and that something S eating me because I'm talking too fast. Don't bother denying it. I saw you do it." He smiled, and for a moment the recklessness went out of his handsome, ruined face and left something gentler. "Flying S a gift, watching S a gift too. It's just quieter, so nobody claps for it, but it's the one that keeps the people you love alive. Remember I said so." Hermione filed it where she filed the things that turned out to matter, and 20 feet up Harry shouted at them to watch, and did something he was certainly not cleared to do, and Sirius and Hermione watched, the loud godfather and the quiet daughter, the 2 who never stopped thinking and clapped for him anyway because that was also a thing you did for the people you loved. Lily taught them the other half, the half James was hopeless at, which was the question of what magic was for. It came up the autumn they were 8, a few weeks before the garden party, when she caught Harry teaching Hermione a trick James had taught him, a nasty little hex that made a person's shoelaces knot themselves, and the 2 of them practicing it on a garden gnome they'd caught and were finding the whole thing hilarious. Lily did not shout, she rarely shouted. She sat them both down at the kitchen table and put the indignant gnome in a flower pot between them and said, "Right, tell me why that's funny." They tried to. They got tangled up in it the way you do when an adult asks you to defend something out loud that was only ever funny because no one made you defend it, and somewhere in the middle of it Harry stopped because he'd heard himself, and Hermione had already gone quiet because Hermione always got there first. "Magic is easy," Lily said when they'd run down. "That's the thing nobody tells you, and the thing you have to learn before you ever set foot in Hogwarts, because they won't teach it to you there, they'll only teach you how. Doing magic is easy. Any fool can knot a man's laces or stop his heart. It's the same flick of the wrist. The universe does care which. The hard part, the only part that matters, the part that took me 20 years and your father a near-death experience to learn, is knowing when not to. Power without that is just a bigger fool with a bigger stick. She looked at the gnome, which glowered back. He's horrible, that gnome. He bites and he swears and he ruins the carrots. And he's a living thing in my kitchen who did nothing to either of you, and you were going to practice pain on him because it was easy and he couldn't stop you. That's the whole of cruelty, loves easy and they can't stop you. Promise me you'll spend your whole lives being the kind of witch and wizard who can and don't. They promised. They were 8 and they meant it the way you mean things at 8, half not understanding, and it went into them anyway. The way the things our parents say at the kitchen table go into us under the level where we keep our reasons, and surface years later in the moment they're needed. Harry would remember it with a wand at someone's throat who deserved worse than he gave them. Hermione would build a life out of it, but that was all years off. That afternoon they only carried the gnome back to the garden together and let it go, and it bit Harry on the way out, and Hermione laughed so hard she had to sit down on the path, and Lily watched from the window and thought that you raised them with both hands, the warmth and the spine, the joy and the question, and if you were very lucky and never stopped paying attention, they grew up into people the world was better for having in it. There was a summer, the year they were both 8, that taught them the other thing. That not everyone meant to be kind. The ministry held a garden party every July, a vast tedious affair on the lawns behind a requisitioned manor, where the great families of magical Britain stood about in their best robes being seen, and the children were turned loose on the grass to form the alliances and rivalries that would govern the next 50 years of British politics without anyone calling it that. James loathed it and went every year because his name opened doors, and Lily had learned to use the doors his name opened to get small impossible things done for children in a basement office 2 floors down, and so the Potters attended and brought their too, scrubbed and stuffed into dress robes and under strict instructions to behave. For the first hour it was only boring. The Weasleys were there, which helped. Molly and Arthur had a brood of red-headed boys and a baby girl, and the one nearest the children's age, a freckled, friendly creature called Ron, who was already taller than Harry and twice as loud, had attached himself to Harry within minutes over a shared and total devotion to a Quidditch team neither of them had ever seen play. The 3 of them, Harry and Ron and Hermione, had found a quiet corner by the hedge where the food was closest and the adults were furthest, and it might have stayed a good afternoon. Then Draco Malfoy came across the lawn with 2 larger boys behind him, in robes that cost more than the food on the tables, with his father's pale hair and his father's way of looking at people as though pricing them, and he stopped in front of the 3 by the hedge and looked at Hermione for a long, deliberate moment and said, "Father says your family's gone soft. He says the Potters used to matter, and now they collect mudbloods off the street like cats bringing in dead birds." The word landed. Hermione did not know it yet, not really, not the full weight of it. She was 8, and she had been a Potter for 2 years, and she had begun in the safety of that house to forget that the world had ever filed her as a problem. But she heard the shape of the cruelty in it even if she did not yet know the dictionary, and she went still, the still of the front room in Bristol, the still of a child watching a door, and the color came up in her face. Ron, who did know the word, who had been raised on exactly how foul it was, went purple and started to get up. Harry got there first. He did not hex Draco Malfoy. He was 8, he had no wand and would not have one for 3 years. What he did was stand up and step in front of Hermione, putting himself between her and the pale boy and the 2 larger ones, the same instinct that had stood his father wandless in a doorway moving now in the son who had never been told the story, and he said in a voice that did not shake, "Say it again." Draco blinked. "What? The word, say it again, go on." Harry's hands were in fists at his sides. He was a head shorter than the boys behind Malfoy and did not appear to have noticed. "Say it to me then, not to her. She didn't do anything to you. You don't even know her. You're just saying what your dad said because you can't think of anything yourself." He took a step forward, and there must have been something in his face, some Potter thing, some echo of his own father who had stood wandless in a doorway and said, "This is my house," to Lord Voldemort, because Draco Malfoy, who had 2 larger boys behind him and every advantage of size and blood and money, took a step back. "She's my sister," Harry said, which was not quite the right word and was the truest word he had. "She's the cleverest person at this entire stupid party, and you're not fit to carry her books. Now apologize or find out what happens." Or what? But Draco's voice had gone up at the end of it, and his eyes had gone past Harry, and Harry turned to see why. Hermione had got to her feet. Every glass on the long table behind the hedge had risen, very quietly, an inch into the air, and was hanging there, trembling all of them at once, 24 crystal glasses full of party punch hovering over the white cloth, turning slowly, catching the sun. The accidental magic of a frightened 8-year-old who had stopped every clock in Bristol the night her parents died, and who was not, this time, frightened so much as furious on Harry's behalf, which is a different and far more dangerous thing. "Hermione," she said very clearly into the silence that had spread out across the lawn as the adults began to notice. My name is Hermione, not that word, and he's right, you're not fit to carry my books. She tilted her head, the grave little tilt that meant she had finished her calculations. And those glasses are very full, and I'm very upset, and I genuinely don't know if I can put them down without spilling, so I'd run if I were you. Draco Malfoy ran, so did the two larger boys. The glasses came down, gently, every one of them, not a drop spilled, and settled back onto the cloth in their proper places just as Lucius Malfoy arrived at a fast walk with his cane and his cold face, and James arrived from the other direction at a faster one, and the two men met over the heads of the children, with the lawn going quiet around them. Was said between James Potter and Lucius Malfoy that afternoon. The children did not fully hear, and the adults who did hear it spoke of it for years. It was not loud. James did not raise his voice. He had learned from his wife that the things that matter are not said loudly. But the whole party heard him say, into the cold, pale face of a man who had bought his way out of Azkaban with a story about being bewitched, "You sent your boy to say it because you haven't the nerve to say it to me yourself. I know what you are, Lucius. I knew it when you walked free and better men didn't. So let me be very clear in front of all these people so there's no confusion later. That is my daughter. Both of those children are mine. And the next member of your family who teaches your son to spit that word at an 8-year-old is going to find out exactly how soft the Potters have gone." He smiled, and it was his father's smile, and it had no warmth in it at all. "Give my regards to your wife. Tell her the punch was lovely, my girl mixed it." He turned his back on Lucius Malfoy, which at a party like that one was the worst thing a person could do to another, and he walked back to his children, and he crouched down in his good dress robes on the grass in front of Hermione and looked at her, and the cold went out of his face entirely. "You all right, B?" Hermione looked at him. 8 years old in dress robes, having just levitated 24 glasses of punch in righteous fury and set them down again without a spill. "He called me a mudblood," she said. The word came out small. "I didn't know what it meant." Ron's face went funny, so I knew it was bad. "What does it mean?" James was quiet for a moment, then he reached out and tucked a wild strand of her hair behind her ear, a thing he did, and he said, "It means dirty blood. It's the ugliest word our world has. It's what frightened people call witches and wizards whose parents weren't magic, because they've decided, these frightened people, that magic ought to belong to them and their sort, and it terrifies them that it doesn't, that it goes where it likes, that it picked you, daughter of 2 dentists from Bristol, and made you one of the most powerful young witches I have ever seen, and there's not one single thing they can do about it." He held her eyes. "It's a word about their fear, B, never yours, you hear me? When somebody calls you that, what you're hearing is a person who's terrified of you, and they're right to be." Hermione considered this as she considered everything, turning it over for the flaw. "Harry called me his sister," she said. "I heard. I'm not, though." She said it carefully, watching his face, because this was a thing she had wondered about and never asked, and the punch and the fury had knocked something loose. "Am I not really? My mum and dad were the Grangers. They were real. I had them." Her chin came up, defending them, defending the dead, defending the things she would not let even this good family paper over. "I don't want to stop being theirs to start being yours. Is that allowed? Can I be both?" And James Potter, crouched on the grass at a ministry garden party, understood that he was being handed something far more breakable than 24 glasses of punch, and that he had to set it down without spilling a drop. They talked about it properly that night at home, the 4 of them, because James said it was a 4-person conversation, and Harry refused to be sent up, and Hermione would not have let him go anyway. They sat in the library in the lamplight, Hermione in the green chair with her feet tucked up, and Lily took it because some things a mother says better. "You can be both," Lily said. "You will be both. You'll be both your whole life, and anyone who tells you have to choose is selling you something. The Grangers were your mum and dad. They made you and they loved you and they're yours forever, and we are never, ever going to ask you to put them down. We don't replace them. That's not what we are." She leaned forward. "What we are is the people who get to have you next. The Grangers had you first, and they'd want you held, and we get to be the ones holding, that's all. You don't lose them by letting us love you. That's not how love works. It's not a cup that empties. It's a fire. You can light 100 others off it, and it doesn't get smaller." Hermione's eyes were wet, but she was nodding, working it through, finding it sound. "Then I want to keep their name," she said, "as well, not instead. Granger and Potter, both." "Then you'll have both," Lily said. "Hermione Granger Potter. We'll change the papers Monday. And I will write it on everything you own in letters 6 inches high, and the first person who tries to tell you you're only half of either is going to answer to me, and I am considerably more frightening than your father, whatever he claims." "That's true," said James. "She really is. It's why I married her." And Hermione laughed, wet and surprised, and that was settled, and it stayed settled, and it mattered more than any of them knew that it had been said aloud and said right, that she was a Granger and a Potter both, that the dead were not betrayed by the living, that she and Harry were the dearest thing each had in the world and were not, and had never been, brother and sister but blood. They were something the language did not have a clean word for. They were each other's. They had chosen it across a front hall on a wet night, a boy holding out his hand and a girl deciding to take it, and choosing is its own kind of family, deeper sometimes than the kind you are simply born into. The grown-ups knew it. The children were too young to know it yet, but it had been named that night in the lamplight, and named things keep. Harry, 8 years old, listening from the floor, understood about a third of it, but he understood the part that mattered. When they all went up to bed, he stopped at Hermione's door, as he always did, and he said, "I shouldn't have said sister at the party if it's the wrong word." "It's not the wrong word," Hermione said. "It's just not the right one either. There isn't a right one." She thought about it. "We'll need to invent one later when we're cleverer." "All right," Harry said. He held out his hand, the old joke, the old not joke, and she took it and squeezed it 3 times. "I'm here," and he squeezed back, and they went to their separate rooms in the warm dark, and the house held them both. The shadow, when it came to James first, and it came at work. He had gone back to the Aurors part-time once his shoulder allowed it, not to the front line. The tremor in his wan hand had ended that, but to the quiet half of the office, the half that read and cross-referenced and noticed things, which it turned out he was better at than anyone had expected, because James Potter had spent his whole life noticing exactly when a gate failed to creak. And in the spring the children were 9, James noticed something. It started as a theft report, the kind that crossed his desk and went no further. A minor break-in at a vault in a foreign bank, a single object taken, nothing else touched. Then another in a private collection in Borgin and Burke's less reputable competitor. Then a third, a museum piece, a cup, gone in the night with the wards undisturbed. James pulled the files because the pattern bothered him, and when he laid the 3 side by side, he saw what they had in common, and the seeing of it put a cold finger on the back of his neck that he had felt only once before, in a hospital bed, listening to Albus Dumbledore decide how much to say. The stolen objects were old, Founders era old. And each had been at one time or another connected by rumor to one of the 4 who built Hogwarts. A locket said to be Slytherin's, a cup said to be Hufflepuff's, a lost thing of Ravenclaw, that the third theft had been hunting and failed to find. Somebody was collecting relics, somebody patient and careful and very far away, who left no trace and took nothing but the one thing they came for. And the thefts had begun, James worked out, sitting very still at his desk with the files spread in front of him, in the spring of the year before, in March, which was the same month that Harry had woken 3 nights running with the scar burning and had said, blurry with sleep, a thing none of them had been able to make sense of and had tried to forget. "He's looking for something. He's so cross. He can't find it." James took the files to Dumbledore. He did it properly, through channels, a meeting requested and granted, and he sat in the round office with its whirring silver instruments and its sleeping portraits and its red gold bird, and he laid out what he had found, the 3 thefts, the Founders' relics, the dates, and he watched Albus Dumbledore's face the whole time, as he taught himself to, and he saw the old man arrive at the end of it already knowing. Not surprised, confirmed. A man checking a sum he had worked long ago against a column someone else had finally found. "You knew," James said, "about the relics. You've been watching this too." "I have wondered about certain objects for a long time," Dumbledore said. He had his fingertips together. The bird watched James with one bright black eye. "Longer than you have been alive. I had hoped I was wrong." "Wrong about what?" James leaned forward. "Albus, my son wakes up screaming that someone's looking for something. Someone is in fact looking for something. Founders' relics, going missing one at a time, and it started the same month the scar started up again. You're going to tell me what you think these objects are. You're going to tell me today. I have spent 8 years being the family you didn't plan for, and I have been patient, and I am done being patient. That is my child's mind these things are reaching into in the night. I have a right to know what's on the other end of it." For a long moment Dumbledore said nothing. The instruments whirred, then he rose and went to the window and looked out at the grounds, at the lake and the distant goalposts, and he said, with his back to James in a voice gone old and tired, "Have you ever wondered, James, how man comes to do what Tom Riddle did at Godric's Hollow? Not the cruelty. The cruelty is common. I mean the other thing, the thing your wife defeated and did not, I believe, destroy. How man comes to walk back out of his own death." "Tell me," James said. "There is a branch of magic so dark that I will not name it in a room where children's portraits are sleeping," Dumbledore said. "A way of anchoring the soul to the world by tearing it and hiding the torn pieces inside objects so that the body may be destroyed and the wizard go on. One piece would be monstrous enough. I believe Tom made more than one. I believe these relics, these proud old Founders' things, are exactly the kind of vessel his vanity would choose." He turned from the window. "And I believe that on the night your wife turned his curse, when his body was destroyed and his soul fled, it was already so torn, so unstable, that a piece of it broke loose with nowhere to go and lodged in the nearest living thing." His blue eyes found James's, and there was no twinkle in them at all. "In your son, in the scar, that is the connection, James. That is why he dreams what the thing in Albania dreams. There is a fragment of Lord Voldemort living behind your child's eyes, and it has been there since he was 15 months old, and I have known it, or feared it, for 9 years, and I did not tell you because I did not know how, and because I have been trying all this time to be sure." The office was very quiet. Somewhere a silver instrument let out a small puff of smoke. James found that he had stood up. He did not remember standing up. "And your plan," he said. His voice came out level, which surprised him because nothing inside him was level. "All these years, when you asked me to bring him to you when he was older so you could prepare him, Your plan for the fragment in my son. What is it, exactly? And Albus Dumbledore looked at James Potter, and for the first time in their long acquaintance the old man could not hold his gaze, and looked instead at the bird, at the floor, at his own folded hands, and James understood, with the cold finger now become a cold hand pressed flat between his shoulder blades, that there had been a plan, and that he had just walked far enough into it to see its shape, and that he was not going to like the shape at all. We will speak of it, Dumbledore said, when I have more to tell you. There may be other ways. I am searching for them. Lily, of all the witches alive, may help me find them. The magic she did is the door to all of it. But not tonight, James, not yet. Take what I have given you home to your wife, and the two of you decide how much your son can carry, because he will have to carry some of it, and soon. But the rest, the worst of it, give me a little more time. I am old, and I have been wrong before, and I would be wrong about this above all things if the world would only let me. James went home. He did not remember the journey. He came in through the kitchen, where the fire was lit because Lily had been first down that morning, and he found the house warm and ordinary and loud. Harry and Hermione at the table arguing over a chessboard, Hermione winning, Harry cheating, both of them laughing, and he stood in the doorway and looked at his son's forehead, at the thin pale line of the scar, and at the bright living face beneath it. And he understood that he was looking at two things at once now and would never again be able to look at only one. He did not say any of it that night. He waited until the children were asleep, and then he sat with Lily in the library in the green chair, her in his lap and the lamp turned low, and he told her everything in order, the order she liked, and she listened without interrupting, her hand going still in his, and at the end of it she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, a piece of his soul, in Harry, yes, behind the scar since the cottage. Yes. Lily was silent again, and James, who knew her better than he knew his own hands, felt her not break, felt her instead begin the thing she always began when handed something monstrous, the thing that had turned a killing curse in a nursery. She began to think. He could feel it happening against him in the dark, the great patient engine of her, taking the horror apart into its parts, looking for the loophole, because there was always a loophole. She had built her whole life on the certainty that the clever men had got it backwards, and there was always a loophole if you only loved hard enough to look. Then we don't wait for it, she said at last, which was what they always said, the oldest vow in the house. We don't sit in a tower and wait. He told you there might be other ways. There are always other ways. I found one once when every book in Britain said there was. She turned in his arms to look at him, and her green eyes in the lamplight were dry and steady and terrible in their resolve. I turned the curse with love because love was the loophole, James. If they put a piece of that thing in our son, then they made a mistake, because they hid it in the one place in the world that is drowning in love, and love is the one thing it cannot survive. We have years, we will use them. We will find the way to take it out of him without taking him with it, and we will do it together, all of us, the way we do everything. She put her forehead against his. Nobody gets to decide my son is a thing to be spent, not Voldemort, not the Ministry, not Albus, no matter how old, no matter how sad. We decide, we're his parents, we decide. We decide, James said and held her, and outside the window the rowan tree moved a little in the night wind, and somewhere far above the house a single owl went over toward the hills. Down the dark corridor in his room Harry slept and did not dream of the thing in Albania, not that night. He dreamed instead of the chess game, of beating Hermione fairly for once, which he never would and never minded. And across the hall Hermione slept with a book open on her chest and the empty cat box still under her bed, and on the landing between their two doors the house ticked and settled in the dark, warm and full and watched over, holding all four of them, the whole and the broken and the mended, through the night and toward the morning, when whoever woke first would go down and light the fire so that the others, coming after, would walk into somewhere warm. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The train north. The letters came on a Saturday in July, 2 of them, carried by the same patient barn owl, and they landed in the butter. Harry got to them first because Harry got to everything first, vaulting the bench with a war whoop, and he held them up over his head out of Hermione's reach, both letters, the heavy yellow parchment and the green ink, until she pointed out with great calm that one of them was hers and she could simply take it once he fell asleep, at which point he handed it over because that was a real threat and they both knew it. They read them at the same time, heads bent together over the table, the way they read everything. Mr. H. Potter, the second-floor bedroom, Potter House, Devon. Miss H. Granger Potter, the green armchair, the library, Potter House, Devon, which made Hermione go very still and then press the parchment flat with both hands as though it might try to leave. It knows where I sit, she said. The school, it knows about the chair. The school knows everything, said Lily, who had come to stand behind them with her hands on a shoulder of each. It's been watching you both since before you were born. There's a quill in an office up there that wrote your names down the day you were each first yours. Mine the day I was born to a house with no magic in it for 1,000 years. Yours the day a road ended and a new one began. It's been waiting for you, both of you, all this time. James said nothing at all, which was rare enough that all three of them looked at him. He was leaning in the kitchen doorway with his tea going cold in his good hand, and he was looking at his two children with their heads bent over their Hogwarts letters, and there was something working in his face that he was not bothering to hide and could not have hidden if he tried. "Dad," Harry said, "you're being weird." "I'm allowed," James said. "It's a weird sort of morning." He came and put his cold tea down and his hand on the back of Harry's neck. "Your grandfather got one of these." "I got one of these, sat right where you're sitting, near enough, different house, same butter. And I always thought when I was a daft kid that the great thing would be the magic, the spells and the broomsticks and the trouble." He looked at Hermione and reached over and tucked the wild strand of hair behind her ear, the old gesture. "And then I grew up and found out the great thing was never the magic. The great thing was the people you'd meet doing it. And you two have already got that part sorted before you've so much as set foot on the train. So, yes, I'm being weird, let me be weird. My kids are going to Hogwarts." Diagon Alley took a whole long golden day, and they did it as a family, all of them, Sirius and Remus included, because Sirius had announced that no godson of his was buying his first wand without a proper audience, and Remus had quietly arranged to be free. And so the Potters went down the cobbled street in a loose laughing knot and bought the whole list and a good deal that was not on the list. They bought cauldrons and scales and a telescope Hermione wanted that nobody could talk her out of. They bought robes, standing on stools while Madame Malkin pinned them, Harry fidgeting, Hermione holding statue, still and interrogating the seamstress about the precise enchantment that made the hems adjust. They bought, at the apothecary, ingredients that made Harry gag and Hermione take notes. They went to the bookshop where Hermione was last seen alive going in and had to be physically retrieved 50 minutes later from behind a wall of texts she had every intention of buying, and where James bought her without comment, the three she had put down and looked at twice and slipped them in with the rest and never mentioned it, and she found them that night and cried a little where no one could see. And they went to Ollivander's, which was the part Harry had been waiting for. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of dust and secrets, and Mr. Ollivander emerged from the stacks like something the stacks had grown, with his pale moon eyes, and he looked at the assembled Potters for a long moment and said, "Ah yes, I wondered when the whole family, how rare and how fine." His eyes went to James. "Mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, a wand for transfiguration, I recall, and it served you, I hope, on the night the papers do not quite tell true." "It's in a drawer," James said. "I don't carry it any more." "No," said Ollivander softly, and his eyes went to the tremor that came and went in James's hand, and he did not remark on it, which was its own courtesy. "No, I imagine you do not." He clapped his hands together. "But we are not here for the fathers, we are here for the children. Ladies first, I think. Miss Granger Potter, your wand arm." Hermione's wand found her quickly, which Ollivander said was unusual and meant something good. Vinewood 10 3/4 inches, dragon heartstring, and when she took it up the shop filled for a moment with the smell of cut grass and ink, and a warmth ran up her arm and her serious face came apart into something young and delighted. "Vine," Ollivander murmured, "chooses those whose purpose runs deeper than they yet know. Yes, a wand that grows toward what it loves and is fierce in defense of it." Quite right, quite right." Harry's wand did not come quickly. Harry's wand came after a dozen failures and a growing pile on the counter, and Ollivander getting visibly happier with each one, as he always did, until at last he went very still in the stacks and came back holding a long thin box with both hands as though it might be warm, and he opened it, and inside was holly 11 inches, and the moment Harry's fingers closed on it a warmth and a wind went through the whole shop, and red and gold sparks fountained from the tip, and Sirius let out a whoop. And Lily put her hand to her mouth, but Ollivander was not smiling. Ollivander was looking at the wand in Harry's hand with his pale eyes gone wide, and after a moment he said, very quietly in a different voice than he had used all day, "Curious, curious, curious." "What's curious?" said James. His voice had changed too. "The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your son's wand, Mr. Potter, gave one other feather, only one other." Ollivander's eyes came up to Harry's forehead, to the thin pale line there, and stayed. "Its brother gave your son that scar, 13 1/2 inches. I sold it myself a long time ago to a young man who was then only curious and clever and a little cold, and who became—" He stopped. "Wands choose, Mr. Potter. I do not pretend to know all their reasons, but I think it no small thing that the brother of the wand that marked you has chosen now to defend you. I think the wands know something we do not. I think they always have." The shop had gone very quiet. Then Sirius said too loudly, "Well, I think it means the wands got taste, and I think we should buy Harry an owl to go with it. And I think Ollivander needs a holiday, no offense, you've gone all sepulchral." And the moment broke, and they paid and went out into the sun, and bought Harry a snowy owl he named Hedwig, and Hermione a ginger cat with a squashed face that hated everyone except Hermione, on principle, immediately and forever. But James walked the rest of that golden day with one hand resting, more often than not, on the back of his son's neck, and that night, after the children were asleep among their new books and their owl and their furious cat, he sat a long time in the green chair with the lamp off, turning a memory over, and Lily found him there and did not ask, only sat with him, because some things you simply sit with. The 1st of September came gray and too soon, the way the day you have been dreading and longing for in equal measure always comes. King's Cross was a wall of noise and steam, the scarlet engine breathing on the platform, owls screeching, 100 families doing the loud, bright, ordinary business of saying goodbye. The Potters made their own knot of it, off to one side by a pillar, and it took a while, the goodbye, because there was a lot of it to do. Sirius gave Harry a package he was instructed not to open until he was on the train, and which turned out to be a fanged frisbee and a vast quantity of contraband sweets. And he gave Hermione a small heavy book bound in black that she opened on the train to find was a journal that wrote back, charmed by Sirius himself, a private line home that no one else could read, and she had to put it straight in her bag and look hard out the window for a minute. Remus gave them each a bar of chocolate and the advice that it was the best cure for nearly everything, and meant it more than the words, and they would learn how much more before the year was out. Then it was the parents, and it went quiet. Lily took Hermione by both shoulders. "You are going to be brilliant," she said. "You already are. And you are going to want, somewhere around October, to be the cleverest girl in the room more than you want to be a happy one, because that's how you keep score, my love. It's how I kept score, and it's a lonely way to win. So here's the only thing I'm going to ask you to learn up there that isn't in any book. Let yourself be loved, not for the marks, for the rest of you. You have always been worth more than your marks, and the people worth keeping are the ones who knew it before they saw a single one." She kissed her forehead. "Write to us, use Sirius's book if it's bad. We're a fire call away, the both of you, day or night, and there is no trouble so big you have to carry it alone. That rule doesn't stop at the school gates, it never stops." Then she turned to Harry, and for a moment the steel went out of Lily Potter entirely, and she just held him, her son, the one she'd crawled across a ruined nursery floor to reach, and she said into his untidy hair, low so only he could hear, "Your scar may trouble you up there. We don't fully know why, and we are working on it, your dad and I, every day, and we will solve it. That is a promise from the witch who turned a curse. Do you understand me? But if it hurts, if anything up there reaches for you in the dark, you tell us. You don't be brave and quiet about it. Being brave and quiet is how people get hurt. You be brave and loud. You hear?" "I hear, Mum," Harry said. James crouched down in front of both of them as he had on the grass at the garden party, level with their eyes. He had his hands on a shoulder of each. "Right," he said. "Marauders send off then, since your old man can't help himself." He looked from one to the other. "You look after each other, that's the whole of it. That's the only instruction that matters, and it's the one your mother and I have staked our entire lives on, so listen. The castle's going to try to split you up sometimes, houses and classes, and the way these things go, don't let it. Whatever the year throws at you, you face it the way you've faced everything since a wet Tuesday 11 years ago, together, back to back." His voice roughened, and he let it. "You're each the best thing the other one's got. I knew it the night she took your hand in the front hall, Harry, and I've never been more sure of anything. Don't you ever let go." Hermione reached out without looking and found Harry's hand and squeezed it 3 times. He squeezed back. James saw it, and his face did the thing it had done at the breakfast table over the letters, and Lily put her arm around him, and the whistle blew. They got on the train. They hung out the window. The scarlet engine pulled away in a great gout of steam, and the last thing the 4 adults on the platform saw was 2 faces side by side at the glass. A black-haired boy and a brown-haired girl, waving, getting smaller, going north together into a world the grown-ups could no longer entirely protect them in. And Sirius put his arm around James from the other side, and Remus stood close, and Lily did not bother to hide her face. And the 4 of them stood on the emptying platform a while after the train was gone, the way you do, not ready yet to turn and walk back into a house that would be, for the first time in 11 years, quiet. The sorting was its own small war, at least for one of them. They had found Ron on the train, of course, taller and louder and exactly himself, and a round-faced, nervous boy named Neville who had lost his toad. And Hermione had found the toad through sheer competence within 10 minutes and made a friend for life without noticing she'd done it. So they came up to the castle in a loose, cheerful clump, and gasped at the ceiling like everyone gasps at the ceiling, and stood in their crowd of first years while the hat sang and McGonagall read the names. Granger Potter Hermione came early in the list, and she went up stiff-backed and put the hat on, and it took a long time. Longer than most. Under the brim, where no one could hear, the hat murmured in her ear, "Oh, now, here's a mind I could do something with. Ravenclaw would feast on you, my girl, and you on it. You'd be happy there, you know, among your own kind, the ones who live to know things." And Hermione, 11 years old, sat very still under the hat and thought back at it clearly, because she had read that you could, but they're in Gryffindor. And the hat was quiet a moment, and then it made a sound that might have been a laugh and said, "Ah, so that's how it is. Not the cleverness, then, that you'd build your house on. The courage to follow your heart up a tower it's afraid of. You know, you came to that family knowing the world could end, and you chose to love them anyway, which is the bravest sum anyone ever refused to do. Yes, all right, if you're sure. Better be," and the brim opened and roared it to the hall, Gryffindor. And Harry, waiting in the crowd, let out a breath, and when Harry was called a few names later and the hall went loud with whispering at the name, He walked up and put the hat on and barely felt it touch his head before it shouted Gryffindor so fast and so glad that McGonagall's eyebrows went up. And he ran to the table where Hermione had saved him a seat with her bag, because she always saved him a seat, and they were sorted and they were home. The new strange enormous home that would hold them for 7 years. But it was while the rest of the sorting went on, while Harry sat at the Gryffindor table with Hermione's shoulder against his and his stomach growling, that he looked up at the staff table for the first time at the long row of teachers, and his scar gave a single hard throb, a flare of pain so sudden and sharp that his hand went up to it before he could stop it, and Hermione felt him flinch and had her hand on his arm at once. "It's the scar," he said under the noise. "Just for a second, it's gone now." "Which way were you looking?" Hermione said, because Hermione was already at 11, the kind of person who asked the useful question. He pointed vaguely at the staff table at the turbaned, nervous-looking professor talking to the sallow, dark man in black beside him, and Hermione looked too and noted it, the grave little look she got, and that night before she let herself sleep in a four-poster in a tower for the very first time, she took out Sirius's black book and wrote one careful line home. Harry's scar hurt at the feast. Looking at the teachers, "We're fine." Writing it down because Mum said to write it down. And in Devon, in a quiet house, a black book on a bedside table warmed, and a mother who was not asleep opened it and read it and did not sleep at all. The year went the way first years go mostly, which is to say it was wonderful and exhausting and full of small disasters that felt enormous. Harry made the Quidditch team, the youngest seeker in a century, and the first letter James sent back was 4 pages long and so proud it was barely legible. Hermione made enemies of half the staff by being right more often than they were, and made an ally of every book in the library. Ron became the third of them without anyone deciding it, the way Hermione had become the fourth Potter, simply by being there and being theirs. They learned to fly and to brew and to turn a match into a needle, and Hermione turned hers into a needle first and then helped Harry with his under the desk where McGonagall couldn't see, and McGonagall saw and pretended not to because she had taught James Potter and knew exactly what she was looking at. The trouble started, as the worst trouble does on Halloween. There was a troll in the dungeons, which should not have been possible, and in the panic of it Hermione, who had not heard the announcement because she had been in a bathroom not crying about a thing Ron had said and would spend years apologizing for, was alone with the troll when it found her. And Harry, who had been counting heads the way his father had taught him to count heads, knew before anyone else that there was a head missing, and the head was hers, and he was gone from the prefect's line before Ron had finished saying her name. What happened in that bathroom became, over the years, one of the stories the family told, second only to the day the rain stopped. How Harry came through the door and saw the Trolls Club come down and Hermione roll under the sinks. How he did the only thing he could think of, which was to make himself louder and more interesting than the girl on the floor, shouting, throwing a tap, a broken pipe, anything, getting the thing to turn. How Ron arrived a breath later, and how it was Hermione, flat on her back under a club the size of a man, who shouted the levitation charm they had learned that week, the swish and flick, the one Harry had been hopeless at and she had drilled into him anyway, and how Harry caught her eye and they cast it together, his wand and hers, lifting the troll's own club up out of its hand and bringing it down on its thick skull, and the thing went down like a felled tree. And the three of them stood in the wreckage of the bathroom, breathing hard and entirely failing to die. McGonagall, when she arrived, was white, but Hermione, who had never told a lie to a teacher in her life and would be appalled at herself for years, stepped forward before anyone could speak and said it was her fault, that she'd gone looking for the troll because she'd read about them and thought she could handle it, that Harry and Ron had come to save her from her own foolishness. It was a magnificent lie and nobody believed it, and it cost her 5 points and won her in that moment 2 friends who would have walked into far worse than a troll for her, and did later more than once. That night Harry wrote home himself, the whole of it, because his mother had said be brave and loud. And the fire call came within the hour, James and Lily's faces in the common room hearth after McGonagall had cleared the room, and there was a great deal of relief in it, and one sharp lecture from Lily about thinking before charging into rooms with trolls in them. And then at the end, when the lecture had run down, James's voice quiet just for them, the 2 faces side by side in front of the fire exactly as they had been at the train window. You went back for her, before you knew Ron was coming. Before you knew you'd survive it, you counted the heads and one was missing and you went. A pause. That's my boy. That is exactly, precisely my boy. Now go to bed, the both of you, and Hermione. 10 points for the worst lie I have ever heard in my life. Your mother and I are framing it. Harry's first Quidditch match came a fortnight after the troll, Gryffindor against Slytherin, and the whole family came to watch, which was not strictly allowed, and which Dumbledore arranged anyway, so that James and Lily and Sirius and Remus sat wrapped in scarves in the staff box while Hermione and Ron jammed themselves into the Gryffindor stand, with a banner Hermione had charmed to flash Harry's name in letters of fire. For 5 minutes it was the best afternoon of Harry's life. He hung high over the pitch in the cold, bright air with the quiet coming over him, the stop-thinking quiet, his father's gift and his grandfather's scanning for the gold. Then his broom tried to kill him. It bucked hard, sideways, a thing brooms did not do, and then again, harder, rolling, trying to throw him off into a 50-foot drop, and the pitch below him became a smear, and his hands were all that was left between him and the ground. In the staff box, James was on his feet with his wand half drawn and no clear target. In the stand, Hermione had her father's borrowed brass spyglass up, sweeping the staff seats, because Hermione did not look at the falling boy. Hermione looked for the cause, the way Sirius had taught her on a summer lawn, and she found it. Quirrell in his turban, eyes fixed on Harry, lips moving without pause. "It's Quirrell," she said to Ron, already climbing over the bench. "Don't argue, it's Quirrell, he's not blinking. You don't curse a broom by blinking. Keep everyone looking at the match." She got along the row and down behind the staff seating, and she did the thing she was best at, which was not flashy and was decisive. A tidy jet of bluebell flames into the hem of Quirrell's robes, close enough to make a man leap up swearing and lose, for 3 vital seconds, the thread of whatever he was holding. High above, the broom steadied. Harry, white and furious, flattened himself along it and went into a dive that made the entire staff box inhale, and pulled up a foot off the grass with the snitch fluttering in his fist and grass stains up one arm, and the Gryffindor stand came down in a roar, and in the box James sat back down very slowly and said, to no one, in the voice of a man marking down a debt he meant to repay, "Somebody just tried to murder my son at a children's sporting event," and Lily beside him, watching a small fire being beaten out of a teacher's robes 2 rows down, said, "Yes, and our daughter just put a stop to it. Write that part in the letter, too." It was after Christmas that the other thing began to gather, the thing under the year, the thing the scar had flinched at across a crowded hall on the first night. It came together slowly, the way these things did for the family, who had learned to read patterns from a man who noticed gates that failed to creak. There was a forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor, and a thing guarding it that Ron's brothers swore was a 3-headed dog. There was a teacher, Quirrell, who stammered and smelled of garlic and wore a turban he never took off, and whose presence made Harry's scar ache in a low, steady way he had stopped mentioning, until Hermione made him mention it, because Hermione checked. There was a break-in at Gringotts that the papers reported, a vault emptied the very day it was emptied of one small package by a friendly giant the children happened to know. And there was Hermione in the library where Hermione always was, piecing it together a fact at a time, until one night in spring she sat down across from Harry with a heavy old book open to a page she had been hunting for weeks and put her finger on a name and said, "Nicholas Flamel, the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. It turns metal to gold and makes a thing that stops you dying. And it's here, Harry. They've hidden it here under the dog on the 3rd floor, and somebody in this castle is trying to steal it, and your scar hurts when you're near Quirrell, and I don't think those are 3 different facts. I think they're one fact wearing 3 coats." Harry looked at the book, and at her finger on the name, and at her face, and the low, steady ache behind his scar chose that moment to flare. "We tell my parents," he said. It was not even a question, it was the deepest reflex his parents had built into him, the one thing they had drilled deeper than the levitation charm. "Whatever this is, we don't go down a trapdoor like idiots in a story. We tell my mum and dad, and we tell Dumbledore, and we let the grown-ups who turned a killing curse handle the thing that wants the stone that stops you dying." Agreed. Hermione, who had half expected to have to argue him out of heroics and was braced for it, sat back and something in her chest eased, and she nodded. "Agreed," she said. "God, yes, agreed. Write to your dad, write to him tonight." He wrote to him that night. And that, more than any spell either of them had learned, was the thing that changed how the year ended, because James Potter was an Auror, and James Potter had spent 11 years waiting without seeming to wait. And when an owl came through his window before dawn carrying his son's account of a hidden stone and a stammering teacher and a scar that ached, James Potter was dressed and at the Devon hearth and roaring green flamed into the headmaster's office before the sun was fully up, with Lily 1 step behind him. A conversation with Albus Dumbledore that had been 11 years coming. "You hid it here." James did not sit. The silver instruments whirred, the portraits had woken and were pretending not to listen. A thing that the most dangerous man who ever lived would burn down the world to get, the one thing that could give him back a body, and you hid it in a castle full of children, with my children in it. Behind a dog and a child's riddle that my 11-year-old solved in a library in her spare time. "Tell me I'm wrong, Albus, tell me I've misread it. I would very much like to be wrong." And Dumbledore, behind his desk, with his fingertips together and his face gone grave and old, said, "You are not wrong, and you are not, I think, going to like my reasons, because they are the reasons of a man playing a longer game than a father can afford to play. Sit down, James, Lily, please. There are things I have kept too long, and the time for keeping them is ending, because he is closer than you know, and the stone is the least of it." He looked at them both, and the steel was there, and under it, for the first time either of them could remember, something that looked almost like fear. "He is in the castle, now, tonight I think, or tomorrow, and I find against all my long planning that I am glad, after all, that the 2 of you are standing in my office. Because I do not think I can do the next part alone, and I have only just understood 11 years too late that I was never meant to. They did not lock the children away in the end, though every parent instinct screamed for it, because Dumbledore would not allow it, and Dumbledore, for once, gave his reason plainly. The fragment in Harry's scar is a door, he said, and tonight, with Tom so close and so hungry, that door will not stay shut whatever we do. If we leave Harry far from us, behind a locked tower, and the link opens, he will be alone with the thing on the other side of it. I will not have that. He stays with us where I can see him, where the protection his mother set in him is strongest, which is to say within arm's reach of the people who love him. That is the only ward that has ever held against this thing. It held in a nursery 11 years ago. It will have to hold again tonight. He looked at Lily. You understand it better than I do. Tell me I am wrong. You're not wrong, Lily said. Love close, that's the whole of it. We keep him close. So they went down together, all of them, into the dark below the third-floor corridor, past the drugged three-headed dog and the strangling vines that Hermione undid with a flare of bluebell fire before James had finished reaching for his wand, past a chamber of mad flying keys and a giant chessboard that they crossed at a run because there was no time for the game the room wanted, the adults in front with their wands lit and the two children kept between them, Harry's hand in Hermione's. His other pressed white-knuckled to his scar, which had become a brand, a line of fire across his skull, getting worse with every door they passed. He's ahead of us, Harry got out. His voice did not sound like his own. The link was open now all the way, and he was seeing double the dark corridor, and laid over it a high cold chamber and a tall mirror and a face, a terrible half-formed face looking out of the back of a man's bare head. Quirrell, he's at a mirror. He can see the stone in it, but he can't get it out. It won't come. He's so angry. He doesn't understand why it won't come. And the other one, the one on the back of him, it's saying. Harry's hand tightened on Hermione's until it hurt. It's saying, use the boy. They came through the last door into the chamber of the mirror, and Quirrell turned, and it was nearly over before it began. He was fast, and he was not alone in his own body, and he threw the adults back from the door with a single scything curse, ropes erupting from the air to bind James mid-stride, fire driving Dumbledore and McGonagall a step back, all of it aimed to clear a path to one thing, the one thing the mirror wanted and Quirrell could not supply, a person who desired the stone but did not desire to use it. A child, the right child. The voice on the back of his skull had told him exactly which one and why, and what was hidden behind the child's eyes that made him doubly worth the taking. Quirrell crossed the chamber and seized Harry by the throat, and screamed. Where his fingers touched Harry's skin they blistered and blackened and came apart, the flesh crisping off them like paper held to a flame, and Quirrell reeled back shrieking, staring at his own ruined hands, and the high cold voice was screaming too now, screaming in fury and disbelief, and Harry on his knees, his scar in agony, understood the thing his mother had given him 11 years ago and never stopped giving. That the love was in his skin, in his blood, a living ward fed every single day by a house in Devon and the people in it, and that it was, to the thing that had torn its own soul apart to escape death, the one substance in all the world that was pure poison. He cannot touch you, Dumbledore said, on his feet now, his voice ringing off the stone, advancing on the writhing Quirrell with his wand up and his face like a thing carved out of the cold. Do you understand at last, Tom, after all this time? She did not merely die for him. She lives for him, and he lives in a house that has never once stopped choosing him, and you built your whole long horror out of the conviction that love was weakness. It is the one wall you were never going to climb. Get out of that man, get out of my school. What happened then happened fast, and the family told it differently for years depending who was telling. Hermione told it plainest because Hermione had been watching the way Sirius had taught her to watch. She said that James, still half bound in the conjured ropes, got one arm free and cut himself loose and was across the floor and between Quirrell and Harry before any of them, dragging his son back by the collar, putting his own body in the gap as he had once put it in a doorway, and that this was the thing she would remember when she was old, not the magic, but her father with his ruined hand and his limp, throwing himself bodily over a burning enemy to reach his son. No wand needed, no spell. Just the oldest defense there is. She said the thing on the back of Quirrell's head tore loose then, because Quirrell was dying and a torn soul cannot hold a dying host, and it came off him like smoke off a snuffed wick, a shapeless screaming darkness, and it gathered itself and flew straight at them, through them, a cold worse than any winter, and James got both arms around Harry and Hermione both and put his back to it and held them while it passed, and it could not stop. It had nowhere in that room to land. Every living thing in it was armored in exactly the substance it could not abide, and so it fled up and out through the stone, gone again into the dark in the distance, beaten and bodiless and very far from finished. And then the chamber was quiet, and Quirrell was dead on the cold floor, and Harry was alive in his father's arms with his scar gone finally, blessedly still, and Hermione had both of them gripped so hard her hands ached, and Dumbledore stood looking at the mirror at his own reflection, with an expression none of the children could read, holding in his hand a small blood-red stone that the mirror had at the last given up to the one person in the room who had wanted only to keep it from harm. Harry woke in the hospital wing 2 days later with the morning sun across the white sheets and his entire family asleep in chairs around the bed. All of them, James and Lily and Sirius and Remus and Hermione closest of all, curled in a chair with a book fallen shut on her chest and dark circles under her eyes, having clearly refused every instruction to go and rest, and Harry lay there a while in the sun and looked at the lot of them and decided that he was, on the whole, the luckiest person who had ever lived, scar and all. Hermione woke first because Hermione slept like a guard dog now and always would. Her eyes found him open and her whole face changed, and she did not say anything clever. She just reached over and took his hand and squeezed it 3 times hard, and he squeezed back, and that was the entire conversation, and it was enough. Dumbledore came that afternoon when the family had been persuaded to go and eat, all but Lily, who would not leave, and he sat by the bed and was, for once, simply an old man who had been frightened. He told Harry the truth, because the Potters had made it clear there would be no more half-truths in this family, not ever again. He told him about the stone, which Flamel had agreed to let be destroyed, and about the fragment behind his scar, in words a boy could carry, and about the thing that had fled, which was not gone, which would come again, stronger each time, until the day it was ended for good. And that day will come, Dumbledore said. I had thought for many years that I knew how it would have to come, and that the knowing of it would cost a price I did not want to name. But I have been watching your family for 11 years, Harry, and I have begun to suspect I had the sum wrong from the very start. Your mother turns out to be cleverer than I am, which I do not say lightly, and your father turns out to be braver than is good for him, and the two of you. He looked from Harry to the door where Hermione had appeared, hovering, unwilling to intrude and unable to stay away. The two of you are something I did not plan for and have stopped trying to account for, and the world is better for you both than my arithmetic ever predicted. Go on, Miss Granger Potter, come in. He is asking for you with his whole face, and you are clearly dying to tell him you finished the book. She came in. Dumbledore rose to leave, and at the door he paused and looked back at the two children, the black-haired boy and the brown-haired girl with their heads already bending together over the book. And Lily watched something move across the old man's face that she had seen there once before at a tea table, a man revising a figure, and this time it did not trouble her at all, because the figure was them, and they kept coming out larger than anyone could measure. They went home for the summer 2 weeks later, and James and Lily came to fetch them in person rather than trust the train, and the homecoming was loud and long and full of the smell of wood smoke and cinnamon, because Lily had a soup on the moment they were through the door. That night, the first night home, Harry lay in his own bed in his own room with Hedwig asleep on her perch and the rowan tree moving at the window. And across the hall Hermione lay in hers with the ginger cat on her feet and the empty box still under the bed. And the house ticked and settled around them, whole and full, and watched, and down in the kitchen 2 parents sat up late at the scrubbed table with a map of Europe, and a list of stolen relics between them and 2 cups of tea going cold, beginning. In earnest now, the long quiet work of making sure the thing that had fled their son twice would never get a third try. First one down in the morning would light the fire, but tonight nobody went up to bed. There was too much to plan, and the planning, for the first time in 11 years, did not feel like fear. It felt like a family deciding together exactly how they intended to win. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The thing inside the diary, the wall of the second-floor study, had become a map of a war. It had started that summer as a single sheet of parchment pinned over the green chair, and it had grown the way the library grew, the way everything in that house grew, by being fed and never pruned. Now it covered the whole wall, the 3 stolen relics James had traced, the locket and the cup and the lost thing of Ravenclaw, that nobody had found. A sketch of a scar in Lily's neat hand with arrows running off it, a column of dates, and in the center a word Lily had written once in red and never crossed out, the word Dumbledore would not say in a room with sleeping portraits, in which the Potters now said freely in their own house because they had decided that the things you cannot name are the things that own you. Horcrux, they had spent the year of the children's first year learning what it was, the 2 of them, out of books that Lily had to charm the covers off and James had to sign 3 forms to even read. They had learned that it was a vessel for a torn piece of soul, that it anchored its maker to life, that it could not be destroyed by any ordinary means, that to unmake one you had to do a thing so violent the soul piece could not flee it, basilisk venom, fiendfire, a handful of the worst forces in the world. They had learned that Tom Riddle had in all likelihood made several out of vanity and out of terror, and hidden them where his pride directed. And they had learned the thing they did not write on the wall, the thing they only said to each other in the dark in the green chair with the lamp off, that there was in all probability one more vessel than Tom Riddle had ever intended, made by accident on a night a curse rebounded, lodged behind the eyes of a boy they would have died for and very nearly had. We don't tell him the whole of it yet, Lily had said that summer with the wall in front of them. He's 12, he gets to be 12. We tell him the scar is a link which he knows and that we're working on closing it, which we are, and we do not tell a 12-year-old that there is a piece of the wizard who killed half our friends living inside him, because there is no version of that sentence a child can hold and stay a child. Her hand had found James's in the dark. We have time. We turn over relics, we close in, we find the way to take it out of him clean, and by the time he's old enough to need to know, it'll be a story about a thing we already beat. That's the plan. We give him a childhood and we do the fear ourselves in here with the door shut. It was a good plan. It survived until the autumn, which is longer than most plans involving Harry Potter survived, and it died on the night the message appeared on the wall. Children had gone back to a school that felt, that 2nd September, subtly wrong, the way a house feels wrong when something has got into the walls. And on the night of Halloween, coming back from the feast, the whole of the school found Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, hanging stiff and stark from a torch bracket, petrified, and above her, painted on the stone in something dark and dried, the words that emptied the corridor of every voice at once. The chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Harry wrote home that night. He had been raised to write home. It was deeper in him than fear. And in Devon, Lily read her son's account of a petrified cat and a message about a chamber, and went very still and went and stood in front of the wall of the war, and James came and stood beside her, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that the plan to do the fear themselves, with the door shut, had just been handed a deadline none of them had chosen. The diary surfaced before the family understood what it was, which was the point of it. A Horcrux is patient, and this one had been waiting 50 years in the dark for exactly the kind of lonely child it found in Ginny Weasley. Ron's sister had come to Hogwarts that year, small and red-headed and overawed, the youngest of 7 in a family of legends, and she had found in her second-hand cauldron a blank diary that wrote back. Nobody knew that yet. What they knew as the autumn went on was that Ginny Weasley grew paler and quieter and more hollow-eyed by the week, that she flinched at the petrification message, that she sometimes could not account for her own hours. And what Harry knew, which he told no one but Hermione, was that whenever Ginny passed close to him, his scar gave the low, ugly throb it gave near Quirrell. The throb that meant a piece of the thing in Albania was somewhere near. "It's her," he said to Hermione in the library low. "Or it's something on her. My scar does it every time she's near. It only ever did that for Quirrell, and Quirrell had him riding on the back of his head. Me, whatever's making my scar hurt, it's the same kind of thing." Hermione, who never dismissed a fact because it was inconvenient, put down her quill. "Then we tell your parents," she said, "tonight. Because if your scar is reacting to something near Ginny the way it reacted to a man with Voldemort growing out of his skull, then this is not a problem for 2 12-year-olds. This is a problem for the witch who turned the curse and the Auror who tracks the relics." She was already reaching for Sirius's black book, the line home. "We are so much better at this than people in stories, Harry, do you realize? We just tell the competent adults. It's revolutionary." But the telling did not go the way it had gone with the stone, because the next day the school turned on Harry, and it turned on him for the cruelest possible reason, which was the truth. It happened at the dueling club, the ill-conceived thing Lockhart had set up, where a conjured snake had been loosed and had turned fast on a frightened second year, and Harry, without deciding to, without knowing he was doing it, had spoken to it, had told it to stop. The words had come out of him in a language he did not know he knew, a low sibilant hiss, and the snake had stopped, had turned its flat head toward him and gone still and obedient, and the whole hall had gone silent and stared at Harry Potter, who had just revealed himself in the middle of a year of petrifications by the heir of Slytherin to be a Parselmouth, to speak the tongue of snakes. The tongue of Salazar Slytherin, the tongue of the Dark Lord himself. By nightfall half the school believed Harry was the heir. By nightfall Harry believed something worse, which he would not say, which Hermione had to drag out of him in the empty common room at 1 in the morning when she found him sitting in front of the dead fire with his knees pulled up. "It's in me," he said, not loud. "The snake thing, the reason my scar hurts near him, the reason I could talk to it. It's not a gift, me, it's him, it's a piece of him, it has to be, why else would I have it? Everyone's right to be scared of me. Maybe I am the heir and I don't even know it. Maybe there's a part of me that opened the chamber and I just don't remember, like Ginny doesn't remember her hours." His voice cracked on it. "What if I'm the thing we're hunting?" And Hermione Granger Potter, 12 years old, did the most important thing she ever did, which was not in the chamber and involved no magic at all. She got down on the cold hearthstones in front of him so he had to look at her, and she took both his hands and she said, "Listen to me. You are not the thing we're hunting. I have known you since I was 6 years old, and you held out your hand in a doorway when I had nothing, and I am the cleverest person either of us has ever met, and I am telling you as a fact, the kind I do not get wrong. The part of you that talks to snakes is not the part of you that is you. A scar is not a soul, Harry. He put something in you the night he tried to kill you, and your mum sent it back at him. And it is a splinter, it is a passenger, it is not the driver, and I know that because I have watched you drive for 6 years, and there has never once been anyone behind those eyes but you." She squeezed his hands 3 times hard. "You went back for me with a troll. You leave the green chair for me when the world's too loud. That's not him. He doesn't have that. He has never once in his life had that. You are the most you person I have ever met, and tomorrow we are going to write to your mother, who turned a killing curse with love, and she's going to tell you the exact same thing, and you are going to believe her even if you won't believe me." He looked at her on the cold hearth in the firelight, and something in his face came back from wherever it had gone. "You really don't think it's me? I have never been more certain of anything." And I am certain of a great many things. It's insufferable, you've said so yourself. He laughed, wet and ragged, and that was the thing that held all the way down to the worst of it. Not a spell, a girl on a cold hearth refusing on the strength of 6 years of evidence to let him believe he was a monster. Lily's letter came by Al at dawn, 4 pages, and the first line of it was, "You are not him, and I can prove it, and here is the proof." And the proof was good because Lily Potter did not offer comfort that could not survive examination. The proof was this, that a soul fragment is a parasite, and a parasite cannot love, and Harry loved ferociously, demonstrably, every day, and therefore whatever lived behind the scar was not in command of him and never had been, because a thing in command of him would have killed the love first, the way a fire kills the air. "You speak Parseltongue," Lily wrote, "because there is a splinter of him lodged in you, yes. We have known since you were small. We did not tell you because you were small, and I am sorry, and we will never keep a true thing from you again. But hear the whole of it. The splinter gives you a language. It does not give you a heart. The heart is yours. It is the one we have watched grow for 11 years, and it is the best one I know. And on the day we take that splinter out of you, and you will still speak every word of love you have ever spoken, because those came from you. Only the hissing will stop. Be brave and loud, my darling. Come home for Christmas. We have a great deal to tell you now, all of it, because you have earned it, and because the time for doing the fear with the door shut is over." They came home for Christmas to a house with the fire already lit and a soup already on, and for one evening nobody mentioned the chamber or the diary or the school that had turned on Harry, because Lily had decreed an amnesty, one night, just the family being the family, and they obeyed her the way they always obeyed her on the things that mattered. There was the tree and Sirius's terrible singing, and Remus losing at chess to Hermione on purpose and then for real, and Harry asleep on the hearthrug by 9 with the ginger cat, who hated everyone, curled against his side as though it had decided he was an exception. It was the next morning, the two of them down first, the fire lit, that James and Lily told him the whole of it. They had agreed it would be the 4 of them, because Hermione was family, and because Harry would want her there, and would only have to tell her afterward anyway, and there had never been a successful secret in this house, and they had stopped trying to keep them. So they sat in the library in the gray Boxing Day light, Hermione in the green chair with her feet tucked up and Harry on the arm of it, the way they sat, and Lily took it, because some things a mother says better, and she did not soften it, because Harry had earned the truth unsoftened, and softening it would have been its own kind of lie. "The night he came to Godric's Hollow," she said, "I turned his curse, and it destroyed his body, and his soul fled. But his soul was already broken, Harry. He'd torn it apart on purpose, years before, to cheat death, the Horcruxes your father tracks, and a soul that torn is not stable. When his body died, a piece of it broke loose with nowhere to go. She held her son's eyes, green to green, the eyes she'd given him. And it lodged in the nearest living thing, in you, in the scar. It has been there since you were 15 months old. That is why you speak to snakes. That is why your scar hurts when he's near. There is a splinter of Lord Voldemort living behind your scar, and has been your whole life, and we have known, your father and I, since you were small. And we did not tell you because you were a child, and there was no version of that sentence a child could hold." The fire ticked. Harry did not move for a moment, and then instead of breaking, instead of the horror they had braced for, he let out a breath that had clearly been held for weeks and said, in a voice almost steady, "I already knew, not the words. But I knew after the dueling club. I worked out it had to be a piece of him. There wasn't anything else it could be." He looked at his mother. "I just needed someone to say it out loud who wasn't scared of me when they said it." "I will never be scared of you," Lily said. "Not for 1 second, not for any reason, not if you spoke every dark tongue ever invented. You hear me? The thing behind that scar is a parasite, and parasites cannot do the one thing you do every hour of every day. They cannot love. It does not love your father, or Sirius, or Remus, or me. It does not lie awake worrying about Ginny Weasley, who you barely know. It did not push anyone clear of anything. That is all you, every scrap of it, and it always has been, and the splinter has been drowning in it for 11 years. She leaned forward and took his hands. "We are going to take it out of you. We don't yet know how. But your father has a wall full of relics, and your mother turned a killing curse when every book in Britain said it couldn't be done. And Albus Dumbledore is going to help us whether he likes it or not, and we are going to take that thing out of you clean, and you are going to live to be a very old and very irritating man. That is a promise from the witch who already beat him once, and I do not break promises." "What if you can't?" Harry said. It came out small. "Take it out. What if it stuck?" And James, who had been quiet, crouched down in front of him, as he always did, level with his eyes. "Then we live with it," he said simply. "And it never wins, because living with it isn't losing, son. Losing would be if you let it make you small, let it make you frightened of yourself, let it talk you into believing the thing the whole school believed for a week, that there's a monster behind your eyes." He put his ruined hand flat on Harry's chest over his heart. "I know exactly what's behind your eyes. I've been looking at it across the breakfast table for 11 years. It's the best thing I ever made, and there isn't room in there for him because you filled it all the way up with us. So we'll find the way, because there's always a way, and we don't wait for things in this family. And if we never do, you'll still have lived a whole long life he never got to touch, surrounded by people who'd burn the world down for you. That's not survival, Harry, that's winning. He'd give every Horcrux he ever made for one morning of what you've got, and he can't have it because he never once learned how. Hermione had not said anything. She had been holding Harry's other hand the whole time, and now she squeezed it 3 times. I'm here, and Harry squeezed back without looking, and the 4 of them sat in the gray light by the fire, and the worst secret in the house was a secret no longer, and somehow the room felt larger for it, the way a room does when you finally open a door you'd been pretending wasn't there. They went back to school after the new year lighter than they'd left it, which made no sense and made all the sense in the world, because a thing named and shared among people who love you weighs a fraction of what it weighs carried alone in the dark. The investigation after that moved fast, because 3 people who told each other everything will always outrun a thing that survives on secrecy. It was Hermione who broke it, of course, in the library where she lived. She had been hunting the nature of the monster for weeks, cross-referencing the petrifications, the way the victims had all been found near water, the spiders fleeing the castle that Hagrid's face had gone strange about, and one gray afternoon she came tearing out of the stacks with a page torn from an ancient book crushed in her fist, and her hair entirely escaped from any attempt to contain it. "A basilisk," she said, slamming the page down in front of Harry and Ron. "It's a basilisk, the king of serpents. Look, it kills with a direct look, but everyone who's been petrified saw it indirectly." Mrs. Norris in the water's reflection. "Colin threw his camera, every single one. An indirect look only petrifies. It doesn't kill, that's why nobody's died. We've been lucky, we've been so lucky." And the voice you keep hearing in the walls, Harry, that only you can hear, the voice that says kill, it's the basilisk, it's moving through the pipes, that's how it gets around the school unseen, the plumbing, and you can hear it because. She stopped and her certainty faltered for the first time, and she looked at him. "Because you speak snake. You're the only one in the school who can understand it. That's not a curse, Harry. Right now, today, that is the single most useful thing about any of us. It means you can hear it coming." They took it to McGonagall, and they took it to the headmaster's hearth, and the machinery of competent adults began at last to turn. James was at the school by evening. Dumbledore had the prefects walking the younger students in groups. The plan was forming, careful and grown-up and correct, to find the entrance, to bring in specialists, to do it slowly and safely with no child anywhere near it. And then Ginny Weasley vanished, and a new message appeared on the wall, fresh and wet and final. "Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever." And there was no more time for slow and safe, because a child was being murdered underneath the school tonight now, and the only person in the castle who could find the entrance and open it was a 12-year-old boy who spoke to snakes. Ron had gone to pieces, and then he had gone to steel, which Harry would remember about him always. When the message about Ginny went up on the wall, when the word skeleton sat there wet and black for the whole school to read, Ron had made a sound Harry had never heard a person make, and for a moment he was just a boy whose little sister was being murdered under the school, white and shaking by the cold stone wall. And then Harry had put a hand on his shoulder, and Hermione had taken his face in both her hands and said, "She is alive until we know otherwise, Ron, and we are going to go and get her. Do you hear me? We, all of us." And something had pulled itself together behind Ron Weasley's eyes. "I'm coming down," he said when they found the entrance, his voice not quite his own. "That's my sister. You can't make me wait up here." "Need you up here," James said, and he said it to Ron as he would say it to a grown man, not a boy, because he'd learned from Lily that the thing that steadies a frightened person is being given a job that matters. "Somebody has to hold this entrance and get word to McGonagall and your parents, and that somebody has to be someone I trust with all your lives, and the others are coming down with me because they speak snake or carry mirrors. You're the one I'm trusting with the door, Ron. Don't make me regret it. Don't let it close behind us." And Ron, given the weight of it, took it and stood his ground at the black mouth of the pipe, while the people he loved went down into the dark, which was its own kind of courage, the hardest kind, the kind that holds the line and waits. He was still there when they came back up with his sister breathing in James's arms. He did not say anything. He just took Ginny's cold hand and held it and walked beside her every step to the hospital wing, and Harry, watching, understood something about Ron, who had become the third of them without anyone deciding it. That there were people who ran into the dark, and people who held the door so the runners had somewhere to come back to, and that a family, a real one, needed both, and was lucky past measure to have one of each. What happened next, the family argued about for years, because James never forgave himself for it, and Lily never thought there was anything to forgive. They had found the entrance, Harry hissing open the tap in the abandoned girls' bathroom while his father and Dumbledore and McGonagall stood over him, and the pipe had gaped, a black throat dropping into the dark, and James had said, flat, the aura voice, "I go first, Albus behind me. The children do not come." And Harry had said, "It only opens for Parseltongue. What if there's another door down there? What if Ginny's behind it and you can't reach her and I'm up here?" And the terrible logic of it had sat in the bathroom while a girl died below, and Dumbledore had said quietly, "He is right, James. God help us, he is right. He comes behind us and he does not leave our sight, and we move now." And Hermione had said, "Then I come too." And when James turned to refuse her, she had already produced from her bag the thing she had been carrying for a week, a small mirror, and she said, "Because you'll all be looking everywhere except behind you, and a basilisk kills with a direct look, and somebody has to watch the corners with a mirror so we see it before it sees us, and that somebody is the one who worked out what it was. I'm not asking, Mr. Potter, you taught me to look after him." "I'm looking after him." They went down together. It was worse than the dark of the stone's chambers, the pipe dropping them out into a vast wet tunnel deep under the lake, the air thick and cold and smelling of stagnant water and old death, the floor crunching with the small bones of 1,000 rats. They went in a tight knot with their wands lit, James and Dumbledore at the front, Harry between the adults, Hermione at the back with her mirror angled over her shoulder, watching the corners, and McGonagall above guarding the entrance and getting word to the Weasleys. And ahead, through a round door wrought with stone serpents that Harry hissed open, they came at last into the Chamber of Secrets itself, a cathedral of greenlit stone and towering snake-carved pillars, and at the far end of it, beneath a vast stone face of Salazar Slytherin, a small figure in school robes lay crumpled and white and not moving, with red hair spread on the wet floor. Ginny. And bending over her, growing more solid by the moment, drinking her down to fuel himself, a tall, dark, handsome boy of 16 who was not a boy at all, who was a memory, wearing the face Tom Riddle had worn before he became the Thing in Albania, with a diary open on the stones beside him and a smile that did not reach his cold and ancient eyes. "Harry Potter," said the memory, "and he's brought his pet mudblood and the broken old fool," and, his eyes found James and the smile changed. "And the father who would not die, how they sing about you in certain circles, the Potter who walked out of Godric's Hollow. Do you know I have wondered for 50 years what went wrong that night, and here's the whole sorry family come down to my chamber to explain it to me in person. How kind. What followed was fast and very nearly the end of all of them." Riddle was strong, fed on a year of Ginny Weasley's stolen life, and he hissed his command to the great stone face, and the mouth of Slytherin's statue ground open, and the basilisk came out, 60 feet of it, thick as an oak, and the chamber filled with the dry horror of its movement. Dumbledore had them shut their eyes against the killing gaze and fight by the mirror and the sound, and Fawkes the Phoenix came down out of the dark in a burst of flame, the bird's loyalty to Dumbledore reaching even here, and tore at the basilisk's eyes, blinding it, taking the lethal gaze off the table and leaving only the fangs. James fought it with everything he had, the duelist he had been at 21, surfacing through the tremor and the limp, driving the blind, thrashing serpent back from the children, and Dumbledore turned the very stones against it, and Harry, his scar-white agony with Riddle so near, did the only thing left, which was to listen, the snake tongue that had made the school fear him telling him exactly where the blind basilisk's head was about to strike. It struck at Hermione. She had her back to it, watching another corner, and the blinded serpent lunged at the sound of her, and Harry shouted in the snake tongue and in his own at once, threw himself, shoved her clear, and the great fang that would have taken her through the heart raked instead down her arm as she fell, a long tearing gash, and the venom went into her, and she cried out and went down on the wet stone, and Harry's whole world narrowed to that. The sorting hat which Fawkes had carried down fell at Harry's feet, and out of it, when he seized it in both hands not knowing why, came a sword, silver and ruby and singing, Gryffindor's own, given to true heir in his moment of need, and Harry Potter came up off the floor with his best friend bleeding her life out behind him and 1,000 years of his house's courage in his fist, and when the blind basilisk reared and struck down at him, he did not flinch from it. He drove the sword up through the roof of its mouth into its ancient brain, and one long curved fang broke off and buried itself in his own forearm as the thing died, its weight crashing down and shaking the chamber, and Harry pulled the fang out of his own arm with the venom already burning up toward his heart and did not even feel it, because he was already turning, already crawling to Hermione. "No," he said. "No, no, look at me, you're fine, you have to be fine." She was white as the stone, her lips going blue, the venom faster in her than in him, her eyes unfocusing. He gathered her up off the wet floor into his lap the way his father had once gathered her up off a kitchen chair, and he pressed his hand over the gash in her arm, and her blood came through his fingers, and he was distantly aware that his own arm had stopped working and that the edges of the chamber had gone dark, and none of it mattered, none of it. There was only her face going gray in his hands. "Don't," he said, "don't you dare. You don't get to be the clever one and then leave. That's not the deal. You come back. Squeeze my hand, me. Squeeze my hand 3 times. I'm here, please." Her hand twitched in his. It could not manage 3, and then the weeping came. Fawkes the Phoenix had crossed the chamber, and the great red bird put its head down, first over the gash in Hermione's arm and then over the puncture in Harry's, and wept, the thick pearl-bright tears of a phoenix falling into the wounds, and phoenix tears are the one cure the venom of a basilisk cannot stand against. And the color came back into Hermione Granger Potter's face like dawn coming up over the rowan tree, like the bar of late sun on the day the rain stopped, and her eyes focused. and found Harry's bent over her, terrified and wet-faced and bleeding and alive, and she lifted the hand that had not been able to manage it and squeezed his once, twice, 3 times. "I'm here. You absolute idiot," she whispered. "You pushed me clear of a basilisk. We're going to have words about expected value." He laughed or sobbed, it was hard to tell, and put his forehead down against hers, and across the chamber James Potter, who had reached his son a heartbeat too late to do the saving himself and would carry that heartbeat forever, stood over the two of them with the dead basilisk steaming behind him, and understood that he had just watched his son do the thing he himself had done in a doorway 11 years ago, throw his body into the gap to buy a beloved life, and that there was no force on earth. Not Voldemort, not Dumbledore, not the whole turning world, that was ever going to break the bond between these two children, because it had just been tempered in the deepest pit of the castle in basilisk venom and phoenix tears, and things forged like that do not break. It was Hermione, even then, even half-healed and shaking, who remembered the diary. "The book," she said, "Harry. The book on the floor by Riddle, it's fading. Look, he's fading because the basilisk is dead and the spell is breaking. But the book is the thing, your scar, it's the same as your scar, it's a..." She could not say the word yet, none of them had said it down here. "It's one of them, isn't it? It's one of the vessels, that's why he was real. He was pouring out of the book into Ginny. Destroy the book and you destroy him. The fang, Harry, the venom, it's the only thing down here that can the fang." And Harry Potter, with a basilisk fang in his bleeding hand and the memory of Tom Riddle screaming at him not to, raised the fang over the open diary, and looked once at his father, who nodded, and once at Hermione, who said do it, and drove it down through the heart of the book. Ink burst out of it like blood in great gouts, and a scream tore through the chamber that was not Ginny's and not anyone living. The scream of a torn soul fragment being unmade with no body to flee to, and the memory of Tom Riddle at the far end of the chamber convulsed and blew apart into nothing, and the diary lay split and ruined and silent on the wet stone, leaking black, and across the floor Ginny Weasley drew a great shuddering breath and opened her eyes. The year of stolen life rushing back into her all at once, alive, restored, weeping, saved. The first Horcrux was dead. They had killed it on purpose, knowing what it was in the dark under the lake, and the family did not yet have the word for what they had just proven, but they had proven it. The thing could be done. The relics on the wall in Devon were not a hopeless catalog. They were a list, and a list could be finished. They did the rest of it the way the family did everything together in the days after. Ginny was returned to her sobbing mother. Harry and Hermione were healed properly in the hospital wing, side by side in adjacent beds because neither would consent to be parted, holding hands across the gap between the mattresses in a way the matron pretended not to see. The family came in a flood, the way the family always came. Sirius arrived, having broken several traffic laws and possibly the sound barrier, took one look at the two children alive in their beds, and sat down hard in a chair as though his legs had stopped agreeing to the plan. Remus came behind him with chocolate, of course enough for the whole ward, and broke it into rough squares and put it into hands that were still shaking, because that was the family's oldest medicine and it worked on more than wolves. Lily would not let go of Harry's uninjured hand. James kept standing at the foot of the beds and then sitting and then standing, a man who had reached his son a heartbeat too late and did not know what to do with his body now that there was nothing left to fight. And the school, which had spent a season believing Harry Potter was the monster in its walls, performed the full and graceless reversal that frightened crowds perform, and decided overnight that he had been a hero all along. He found he did not much care either way. He had stopped somewhere in the dark under the lake, keeping score by what the crowd believed. The only verdict that had ever mattered had been delivered on a cold hearth at 1 in the morning by a girl who refused to think he was a monster, and she was in the next bed over, alive, complaining about the matron's restrictions on reading, and that was the whole of the world he intended to live in from now on. Ginny Weasley came to thank them when she could stand, white still and ashamed in the way the rescued are, and Hermione would have none of it. "You were a battlefield," she told the younger girl, flatly in the voice she kept for facts. "Not a coward. A 50-year-old curse went to war inside an 11-year-old, and the 11-year-old is still here, which makes you the toughest person in this wing, and I have a basilisk bite, so that's saying something. Sit down, have some of Remus's chocolate." "You're one of ours now, that's how it works. Ask Harry, ask me. None of us got a vote either." Lockhart, it transpired, had tried to flee the castle the night of the rescue and had been found in the entrance hall with his trunk packed, and the story of it spread, and his career did not survive the telling. Sirius laughed about it for a week. Lily, who had never trusted a man with that many portraits of himself, only said that the year had at least cleaned one fraud out of the castle, which was more than most years managed. And then when the children were strong enough, the whole family went up to the round office, James and Lily both, and they sat Albus Dumbledore down, and they had the conversation that had been 11 years coming, the whole of it, with the door shut and nothing held back. "That was a Horcrux," James said. "The diary. You knew it the moment I described it. You've known what they are for longer than any of us. So we're going to do this properly now, Albus, as equals, because my 12-year-old just destroyed one with a fang while bleeding from a basilisk bite, and I am done, I am completely done being managed. How many? Where? And the prophecy, all of it, tonight. And Dumbledore, looking at the two children asleep against each other in their chairs, at the father with the ruined hand and the mother who had turned a curse, was quiet for a long moment, and then he told them. He told them everything. The prophecy and what it meant, the one with the power to vanquish him, marked as his equal. The Horcruxes, his best count of them, the diary now dead, the ring, the locket, the cup, something of Ravenclaw, as the snake, the thing in Albania, kept always near it. And at the last, in the lowest voice, looking at the sleeping boy with the scar, the thing he had carried alone for 11 years, the thing he had believed could only end one way. I had thought, Dumbledore said, that the fragment in Harry could not be removed, that it was bound to his life, and that one day, when Voldemort had a body again, Harry would have to. That a part of this would ask of Harry a price I could not bear to name, and that my task was to prepare him gently over years to pay it willingly when the time came. His old eyes were wet. That was my plan. I have hated it every day of my life, and I am telling it to you now in full because I no longer believe in it, and I want you to know that I was wrong and that you are the reason I was wrong. He looked at Lily. You turned the curse with love and lived. You have spent 11 years building, around the splinter in your son, the densest field of love any Horcrux has ever been hidden in. I begin to think you have not been sheltering him. I think you have been dissolving it, slowly, without knowing the mechanism. I think there may be a way to take it from him that I could never see because I was looking for a sacrifice and you were busy making a home, and a home, it turns out, is the stronger magic. Help me find it, not as my soldiers, as his parents. I should have asked you 11 years ago. I am asking you now. And Lily Potter looked at her sleeping children, the dark head and the brown one with their hands still joined across the gap between the beds, forged and unbroken, and she looked at the old man who had finally, after 11 years, set down the terrible plan and asked for help instead, and she said, "We'll find it together. That's the only way anything in this family has ever worked." She reached over and brushed the hair off Harry's scar, the gentle gesture, the one she had been making since a ruined nursery. Nobody spends my son. We take it out of him clean, and he lives, and he grows old, and he's happy, and that thing dies screaming the way its diary did. That's the new plan, Albus. It's a better one. Write it on the wall. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The long hunt. The hunt became a way of life, the way the full moons had, the way the day the rain stopped had, another thing the family did together that no almanac would recognize. By the time the children were 14, the wall in the second-floor study had been joined by a second wall, and a third, and the work of unmaking Lord Voldemort had stopped being a secret kept behind a shut door and become simply the shape of the Potters' holidays. They did it the way they did everything, around the kitchen table, with tea going cold and someone arguing. James brought the tracking, the Auror's patience, the gift for the gate that failed to creak. Lily brought the theory, the deep, strange scholarship of the magic she had bent in a nursery and spent 14 years learning to bend on purpose. Sirius brought the contacts no respectable person would admit to having, and Remus brought the languages and the dogged reading, and the two teenagers who had grown up with the word Horcrux on the wall the way other children grew up with a height chart, brought the thing the adults had stopped being able to supply, which was fresh eyes and the arrogance of the young who do not yet know a thing is supposed to be impossible. It was Hermione, 16, who finally cracked the ring. They had known of it for a year, the gaunt ring, Marvellow's ring, a heavy ugly thing with a black stone, last seen in a derelict shack in a village called Little Hangleton. Dumbledore had been hunting it himself, in parallel, the way Dumbledore did everything, half with them and half alone, never quite able to surrender the habit of carrying the heaviest things by himself. And one gray October the family learned, through one of Sirius's disreputable contacts, that Albus Dumbledore had located the shack and meant to retrieve the ring, and meant to do it that night alone because he had reason to believe the ring was guarded by a curse he did not wish to risk on anyone else. "He'll die," Lily said. She was already up from the table, already pulling on her traveling cloak, already become the thing she became when a life was on the line, the cold, clear engine of her. Whatever the curse is, he means to take it on himself rather than spend a soldier on it, and he is brilliant, and he is proud, and he is going to put on a cursed ring alone in a shack with no one to pull him back from it, because that is what he does, it is the only flaw he has, and it is going to kill him. James, now. They were too late to stop him and not too late to save him, which became, that night, the whole argument the family had been having with Albus Dumbledore for 15 years, rendered in a single room. They came through the door of the gaunt shack to find the old man on his knees on the filthy floor with the ring already on his finger, the black stone cracked where he had struck it with the sword to destroy the soul fragment, and a curse like black fire already racing up his arm from the hand that had worn it, his face gray, his eyes glazing, the death in him moving fast toward his heart. He had destroyed the Horcrux. The ring had destroyed him in the same instant, the bargain he had clearly been willing to make, and he would have been dead within the hour, alone, with no one knowing where he had gone. and Lily Potter dropped to her knees in the filth beside him and took his blackened hand in both of hers and went to work. She did not have a cure. There was no cure. The curse was a masterwork of malice, designed to spread and kill, and the most any healer in Britain could have done was what Dumbledore had clearly already calculated, which was to slow it and lose. But Lily Evans had spent 14 years studying the one thing the dark arts could not abide, the thing she had turned a killing curse with, and she did not try to cure the curse. She tried to wall it. She poured into the binding she cast around his wrist the same impossible substance she had built her son's whole childhood out of, a freely given thing, a refusal to let go, and she bound the black fire below the wrist and would not let it climb, and she held it there on her knees in the dirt for an hour, sweating, shaking, while James braced the old man's shoulders and Hermione read aloud from Lily's own notes in a steady voice, and Sirius held a light. She saved his life. She could not save the hand. It stayed blackened and dead to the wrist, a withered, ruined thing he would carry to the end of his days, the price of the bargain paid in part instead of in full. But Albus Dumbledore did not die in a shack that night alone, and when he came back to himself in the gray dawn with his life walled into him by a witch kneeling in the filth, he looked at the 4 Potters who had come because they could not let him carry the heaviest thing alone, and something in the old man's face broke all the way open at last. "I have spent my life," he said very low, "believing that the people I love are safest when I keep my burdens from them, that to share a danger is to spread it." He looked at his ruined hand and then at the woman who had saved the rest of him. "I have been wrong about that for 100 years. You came because I tried to bear it alone, and bearing it alone is the only thing that nearly killed me. I am an old man, Lily, and you have just taught me the lesson I have been failing to learn since before your grandparents were born." His eyes were wet. "Love close. You said it to me once in a hospital wing. I did not understand it. I think perhaps tonight I have begun to." "Don't ever do that again," Lily said, which was the only answer she had the steadiness for, and James helped the old man up out of the dirt, and the family took Albus Dumbledore home with them to Devon to the lit fire and the soup, and put the most powerful wizard in the world to bed in their spare room like one of their own, because that in the end was the thing the Potters did. They made room, even for him, especially for him. The ring's black stone, when they examined it later, turned out to hold a secret of its own, a thing older than Horcruxes, but that is a tale for the end, and they did not understand it that night. That night they only counted the diary dead, the ring dead, 2 of the vessels gone, and written beneath them on the wall in Lily's red hand, the ones that remained. They kept the day the rain stopped all through the war, which mattered more in those years than it ever had in the easy ones. The spring the children were 15, with the wall full of relics and the enemy not yet embodied and the whole house tired in the bones. Lily made the dark cherry cake anyway, on the Tuesday nearest, as she had made it for 10 years, and the family walked down the wet lawn to the rowan tree, the way they had for 10 years, and James told the story as he had for 10 years, and it had acquired by now 4 dragons, 2 sword fights, a brief naval engagement. Roll for Sirius that Sirius insisted on, though he had not been present, and nobody corrected any of it, because the correcting was the point and the corrections were the love. And there she was, James said, under the rowan, to a daughter who was nearly as tall as her mother now, in the doorway, soaked to the skin, holding her dragon book like a shield, and she looked your mother dead in the eye and she said, "I'm bringing the cat's box anyway." He pointed the fork. "Best thing this family ever found in the ring. 10 years and I'd drive to Bristol through worse weather than that for you tomorrow, B, and you know it." "Cat's been dead 3 years, Hermione said, "and I still have the box," which was true, the empty box still under her bed at home, and James had to look hard at the rowan tree for a moment, and Harry reached over without a word and took her hand and squeezed it 3 times, and the family ate cherry cake on the wet grass under the tree while a war gathered somewhere over the hills, and refused, on that one Tuesday, to let it in. It was the small things they fought hardest to keep in those years. The Sunday pancakes still scorched because James still could not cook and would not let anyone else try. The full moons still kept, the long watch and the morning chocolate, though Remus was grayer now and the changes harder. The fire lit each morning by whoever rose first. They held to all of it with a ferocity that an outsider might have found strange in a family at war, and that the Potters understood perfectly, because they had learned the lesson in a ruined cottage 16 years before and never once let themselves forget it, that the ordinary warm morning is not the thing you do between the battles. The ordinary warm morning is the thing the battles are for. The return, when it came in the spring the children were 15, and it cost them more than anything had since a ruined nursery, and it nearly cost them everything. They had always known it would come. Lily had said it for years. A man who tears his soul apart to escape death does not stay a wraith forever if there is anyone left loyal enough to build him a body. And there was. Peter Pettigrew, who had betrayed them once and vanished into the body of a rat, had spent 14 years finding his way back to his master, and in a graveyard in Little Hangleton on a cold night in May, he completed the oldest and most obscene magic the family had ever had to read about, and gave Lord Voldemort back a body of his own. The horror of it was the ingredient he came for. The ritual called for blood, and not just any blood, the blood of an enemy, forcibly taken, and there was one enemy whose blood Voldemort wanted above all others, because that enemy was armored in the one protection the Dark Lord had never been able to break. He wanted Harry's blood. He believed, and he was right, that if he could take the blood that ran in the one child who had burned Quirrell to ash, take it into his own new body, he could take the protection with it, could finally, after 14 years, make himself a thing that could touch Harry Potter alive. So they came for Harry. In the spring of his 5th year, with the family's guard at its highest and its most weary, Voldemort's returning servants laid an ambush of terrible cunning, and they very nearly took him. It happened at the edge of the school grounds at dusk, a portkey disguised as an ordinary thing, and Harry would have been gone, snatched across the country to a graveyard in a knife, if Hermione had not, at the last possible instant, seen the wrongness of it, the same gift Sirius had named on a summer lawn 9 years before, watching, the quiet gift that keeps the people you love alive. She saw the trap a half-second before it closed, and she did not hesitate. She flung herself at Harry and knocked him clear of the portkey's reach, and took herself partway into it instead, and for one ghastly moment the family's whole nightmare inverted, and it was Hermione being torn across the country toward the knife. What happened then happened fast, and the family told it in pieces for years, because no one of them had seen all of it. James and Sirius were there within the minute, apparating to the screaming edge of the wards. Dumbledore was there. And Voldemort's servants, balked of Harry, would have settled for Hermione, would have taken her blood or her life, or used her as a hook to draw Harry to them. And the fight that broke out in the blue dusk at the edge of the grounds was the worst the children had ever been in. Curses like green and red lightning, the dark figures of masked Death Eaters, the whole long-feared war crashing down at last on 2 15-year-olds and the people who loved them. Sirius Black fought like the thing he had been before Azkaban-shaped shadows entered their lives, laughing, brilliant, driving 3 masked figures back from the place where Hermione had fallen, buying the seconds the others needed to reach her. And one of the masked figures, falling back, sent a curse low and vicious that caught Sirius full in the chest and lifted him off his feet and flung him backward toward the old stone archway at the edge of the grounds, the one the children had never thought twice about, and he went down hard against it and did not get up, and his wand rolled from his hand, and for one endless instant the family's oldest terror, the loss they had each privately rehearsed and never spoken, hung over the dusk and prepared to fall. It did not fall, because James Potter was already moving, as he had moved in a doorway, as his son had moved toward a troll, and he reached his oldest friend before the dark could finish the job, and he stood over Sirius's body with his wand up and the tremor gone from his hand, and Lily was a step behind him with her wandless hand already pressed to the wound in Sirius's chest, already pouring her impossible refusal into him as she had into Dumbledore, into Harry, into everyone she had ever decided was not allowed to die. And Hermione, half-conscious on the grass, reached up and gripped Harry's hand and squeezed it 3 times. "I'm here." And Harry, who had been about to do something reckless and final, felt the 3 squeezes and came back to himself and stood his ground and fought beside his father, over the bodies of the 2 people on the ground, until Dumbledore's terrible white fire drove the masked figures back and the portkey's pull broke and the dusk went quiet. Sirius lived. He should not have. The curse had been meant to kill and would have killed anyone Lily Potter had not personally decided to keep. And she knelt on the grass with her hands buried in his ruined chest and kept him, the same way she kept all of them, by main force and love and the refusal that had defeated death once already in a nursery. And when Sirius Black opened his eyes an hour later in the hospital wing and croaked, "Did we win?" James Potter put his face down against his oldest friend's shoulder and shook. As he had in a hospital ward 14 years before, and did not answer, because winning was not the word and surviving was, and surviving in that family had always been the same thing as winning, because they had decided long ago that as long as they all came home, the dark could keep the rest. Sirius spent 3 weeks in a bed he loathed, in the house in Devon, with the whole family rotating through his room so that he was never once alone in it, because that was the rule, and the rule applied to him most of all. He was a terrible patient. He threw grapes. He tried to leave 4 times. He told the story of his own near-death so many times and with so many embellishments that James accused him of having learned storytelling from a Potter, which Sirius took as the compliment it was and the insult it also was. It was Harry who sat with him the evening the household had finally gone quiet, and Sirius, propped on his pillows with the color back in his ruined, handsome face, looked at his godson for a while and then said, with the directness that was the truest thing about him, "So, you and Hermione." Harry went still. "I don't know what you mean. You're a Potter and a terrible liar. It's genetic. Your father's the same." Sirius reached over and cuffed him gently round the head. "I watched you nearly tear the world in half when that portkey took her instead of you. That wasn't a boy frightened for his sister, Harry. I've buried that look. I know what it is. So, you and Hermione." He smiled, and for once there was nothing reckless in it. I think it's the best thing that could happen to either of you for what it's worth, and I think you're both being very sensible and very brave about waiting, which is more than I ever managed about anything. But hear me, because I nearly died last month and it makes a man honest. He gripped Harry's wrist. Don't wait too long out of fear. Wait because the timing's wrong, fine. Wait because there's a war, fine. But the day the war ends, you go and you tell that girl the whole of it. You don't let a single ordinary morning go by unsaid, because I have spent 14 years learning what it costs to assume there will be time. There isn't always time. Love loud, kid, your mum's word. Love loud while there's someone there to hear it. Harry looked at his godfather, alive in the bed he loathed, and squeezed his wrist back and said, I will, the day it ends, I promise. And he meant it, and Sirius saw that he meant it and was satisfied and threw a grape at him to ruin the moment, because some things between family are too large to be left solemn. But the dark did not come away with nothing, and the family did not pretend otherwise. Lord Voldemort had his body taken in the end from an old grave and a servant's hand, and the forced blood of a Death Eater rather than the child he had wanted, which meant the protection still held, which meant he still could not touch Harry, which was the one bright thread in the whole black night and the thread the whole future would hang from. But he was embodied. He walked the world again, red-eyed and corporeal, with his loyal returning to him and his Horcruxes, the ones the family had not yet found, still anchoring him to life. The war that everyone had pretended for 14 years was not over. It had only been holding its breath, the way the Fidelius had once held its breath over a cottage, and now it had let the breath out, and the second war had begun, and this time the Potters were not a young couple hiding in Godric's hollow. This time they were ready. They had been getting ready for 14 years. Lord Voldemort embodied did not sleep, and in the long cold hours he did his arithmetic, and the arithmetic had begun to come out wrong. He felt them go. That was the thing his returning servants did not understand and dared not ask about, why their master would wake with a cry that had nothing of fear in it and everything of arithmetic, his hand going to his chest. He felt his anchors die. The diary years ago, a tearing absence he had told himself was an aberration. The ring, a second wound in the fabric of his own continuation. And now, recently, a third, the locket gone and the wrongness of his own diminishing settling into him like cold water filling a hold. Someone was unmaking him, methodically, from a list. Someone knew the secret he had told no living soul, the secret he had split his very self apart to keep, and was working through it the way a clerk works through a ledger, and the impossibility of it gnawed at him in the dark. He knew who, of course he knew who. The Potters who would not die, who had been a flaw in his arithmetic for 16 years, the woman who had turned his curse with a sentiment he had spent his whole life proving was weakness, and her husband who walked when he should have lain dead, and the 2 children they had raised, the one with his fragment behind his scar and the muggle-born girl who solved what could not be solved. He had reached for the child's blood in a graveyard and been balked of it. He had reached for the girl as a hook and been balked of that too. And every time he reached toward that family, the reach came back empty because they closed around their own like a fist, like a thing with no gaps in it, and he did not understand it, and the not understanding was, though he would have killed the servant who named it aloud, a kind of fear. He had one anchor he was sure of. The cup, Hufflepuff's cup, was deep in the vault of his most fanatical servant beneath the goblin's bank, behind 100 wards and a dragon and the loyalty of a woman who would die before she failed him, and there at least his continuation was safe. He did not know that a girl was, even then, cross-referencing a way into that vault. He did not know that the list he was being worked through had only 2 more lines on it after the cup, the lost diadem and the splinter behind a boy's scar, and that the family hunting him had nearly run the whole length of it. He knew only that he was diminishing, that the thing he had murdered and torn and unmade himself to escape was somehow finding him anyway, coming for him through the patient love of people too foolish to know that love was no weapon at all. He gave the order in the cold dark in the high voice that had not changed in 50 years. Find the children, find the family, bring me Potter's son alive and the rest of them as you like. And his servants went out into the night to obey, and far to the west, in a stone house in Devon, a mother stood in front of a wall and looked for a loophole, and the 2 great engines of that long war, the cold arithmetic of a man who had unmade himself to live forever and the patient love of a family who had decided no one they held would be spent, turned slowly toward each other through the dark, toward the spring when they would finally meet. It was somewhere in the long, hard middle of that, between the return and the end, that the other thing happened, the thing that had been coming as slowly and surely as the war, and that no one in the family was the least bit surprised by except the 2 people it was happening to. Harry and Hermione fell in love. They did not notice it happening, which was the absurdity of it, because they noticed everything about each other and always had. They had held hands since they were 6. They had slept in adjacent hospital beds more times than was decent. They had a private language of squeezed fingers and saved seats and books left where the other would find them, and they had built over 10 years the kind of intimacy that most people spend their whole adult lives failing to find, and somewhere around the age of 15 the nature of it had begun, very quietly, to change, and neither of them had the first idea what to do about it. It came to a head as these things do at a stupid dance. There was a ball that winter, the school putting on its finery, and a boy from Durmstrang, a famous one, an athlete with a jaw, had asked Hermione to go with him, and she had said yes, partly because she was 16 and had spent her whole life being told she was clever and not pretty, and it had been nice just once to be asked for the other thing, and partly, if she was honest, which she always was, to see what Harry's face would do. Harry's face did a great deal. He did not have a word for what it did. He told himself it was that he did not trust the Durmstrang boy, who was 18 and famous and surely had designs. He told himself it was protective, brotherly, the thing he had always felt, and he went to the dance with a Ravenclaw girl who was perfectly nice and whose name he kept forgetting. And he spent the entire evening watching Hermione Granger-Potter laugh under the floating candles in robes the color of bluebell fire, with her hair done in a way he had never seen. And he felt something turn over in his chest that was not brotherly at all, that had never once been brotherly. That he understood all at once with the force of a thing that had always been true and was only now being looked at directly. A great aunt of someone's, a vague pure-blood matron, chose that moment to drift past and say, indicating the two of them across the hall, and those two, the Potter children, brother and sister, how sweet, raised together, and Hermione, who had heard it her whole life and let it go 100 times, turned and said with a clarity that cut through the music, "We're not actually. Not brother and sister, I'm adopted and we're not related at all, and I do wish people would stop assuming because it's rather important." And her eyes found Harry's across the hall as she said it and held them, and the whole crowded, loud, bright room went, for the two of them, completely silent. They did not kiss that night. They were too young and too clever and too frightened of breaking the one thing each of them could not live without, and they had watched in their own family what it was to love someone so much that losing them would end you, and they were not fools. They knew exactly what they would be risking. So they did the thing that was harder and rarer and entirely theirs. They went out onto the cold stone balcony away from the music, and they stood at the rail in the winter air, and Harry said, "Me," and Hermione said, "I know," and Harry said, "Do you?" and Hermione said, "I always know. It's insufferable." "You've said so," and Harry laughed, the wet, ragged laugh, and took her hand on the cold rail and squeezed it 3 times, and she squeezed back, and they stood there a long while not saying the enormous thing, because the enormous thing did not need saying. It had been true for 10 years, and there was a war on, and some things you guard by not rushing them. "Not yet," Hermione said at last to the dark grounds. "Not in the middle of this. I won't do it in the middle of a war where one of us could. I won't have the best thing in my life be a thing we grabbed because we were frightened. When it's over, when that thing is out of your scar and he's dead and gone and we're just 2 ordinary people with our whole lives in front of us and nothing chasing us, then I'll let myself, then I'll let us." She turned to look at him, and her face in the light from the windows was steady and certain and 16. "Is that statistically a terrible plan? Deferring the entire question to a hypothetical post-war future that isn't guaranteed." "Catastrophic," Harry said. "Worst plan I've ever heard. Your expected value is a disgrace." "I know. I'm completely in," he said. "When it's over, all of it, you and me and the rowan tree and a house full of love and nothing chasing us. That's the deal. That's what we're fighting for. That's what's on the other side of all this." He looked at her and put everything he had into it, the whole of the secure, uncertain heart his parents had built in him in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon. "We win the war and then we get the rest. Both of us, I promise you. Squeeze on it." She squeezed his hand 3 times and he squeezed back, and that was their engagement, more or less, sworn on a freezing balcony at 16 with a war coming. 2 children of a house that had taught them love was the loophole sealing the largest loophole of their lives, and agreeing, with the discipline that was the truest thing they had inherited, to wait for it. The cave was the last of the great retrievals, and it nearly broke the rule the family had staked everything on, which was that no one carried the heaviest thing alone. They had found the locket at last, Slytherin's locket, hidden in a cave on a black sea cliff behind a defense so cruel it could only have been Tom Riddle's. A basin of potion that had to be drunk to the dregs to reach the locket beneath. A potion designed not to kill but to do worse, to fill the drinker with every terror and despair they had ever known, to make them beg to stop, and to deny them water in a cave ringed by an army of the drowned dead waiting for anyone who reached for the lake. Dumbledore, of course, meant to drink it himself. It was his oldest habit, the one that had cost him a hand, and he had not, despite the lesson, fully unlearned it. "I am old," he said, on the black shore with the basin glowing between them. "I have lived my life. The potion will take a younger one to a darker place and leave more behind. Let me carry this one. I am asking you to let me." And Lily Potter said no. She said it as she had said not Harry in a nursery, flat and final and from somewhere underneath argument. "We don't carry the heaviest thing alone. That is the whole of what this family is, Albus. It is the one rule. It is the rule that saved your life in a shack and Sirius's life on a lawn and my son's life in a doorway. And we are not going to break it now on this beach because you are too proud to be helped. We drink it together, in turns." A mouthful each around the circle, all of us, so that no one of us goes all the way into the dark, so that whoever is drinking always has 5 people holding on who are not yet drowning. You taught me with your blackened hand that bearing it alone is the thing that kills, so we don't, we share it. That's the magic you never had. Tom Riddle built this for one despairing soul alone in the dark, and he could not conceive of 6 people taking it in turns, holding each other up, because he never in his life had 5 people who would put their mouths to his poison so he didn't have to drink it all. That's the loophole. It's always the same loophole. Now make a cup, James, and let's get our locket. So they drank it in turns, the whole family, a mouthful each around the circle, and it was the worst hour of any of their lives, each of them taken in their turn down into the thing they feared most. James back to the bottom of a staircase listening to his wife beg, Lily back to crawl across a ruined floor toward a crying child, Hermione back to a wet road and a windscreen and clocks stopping at 11:14. Harry into a future where the scar won, and he watched himself hurt the people he loved with hands he could not stop. But none of them went all the way down, because every time one of them broke and wept and begged, there were 5 others holding on, pouring the next mouthful, saying their name, squeezing their hand 3 times, until the basin was empty and the locket lay bare at the bottom, and the drowned dead rose out of the black lake in their thousands, and the family, sick and shaking and clinging to one another, fought their way back to the boat in a storm of Dumbledore's white fire and James's old fierce skill and Hermione's bluebell flames blazing in the dark, and got out, all of them, with the locket, alive. They destroyed it that night with a basilisk fang Hermione had thought to bring up from the chamber years before and kept, because Hermione kept the things that turned out to matter, and the locket screamed and died the way the diary had, and the family sat on the black shore in the dawn, wrung out and triumphant and whole, and counted again. The diary, the ring, the locket. 3 vessels gone, and the cup located now through the locket's clues, and the lost thing of Ravenclaw's run almost to ground, a diadem in the castle itself. The diadem they got themselves, the 2 of them, and it was the day Harry and Hermione stopped being children the family protected and became, fully, 2 of the hunters. Hermione had run Ravenclaw's lost thing to ground through a year of patient cross-referencing, a diadem, a crown, hidden by Tom Riddle in the one place he had ever called home, a vast forgotten room in the castle itself where centuries of students had hidden their secrets, a room that became whatever the seeker needed it to be. They went in together on a gray afternoon, the 2 of them, because they had finally convinced James that a thing hidden inside a school was a thing 2 students could reach more quietly than a squad of aurors, and because Lily had said, with the clear eyes of a woman who had stopped being able to keep her children out of the war, that they were 16 and competent and in love, and she would rather send them in together, watching each other's backs as she and James watched each other's, then wrap them in cotton and lose them to the first thing that got past her. The room, when Harry hissed nothing and simply needed, opened into a city of lost things, a mountain range of abandoned furniture and forbidden books and the detritus of 1,000 years, and somewhere in it, Hermione's calculations said, on a bust beside a cabinet, sat a crown holding a piece of a torn soul. They found it in 20 minutes because Hermione had narrowed the search to grid, and they worked the grid, the partnership of them moving through the maze with the wordless efficiency of 2 people who had been finishing each other's sentences since they were 6. Harry watched the corners. Hermione read the room. And there it was, tarnished and beautiful and humming with the wrongness Harry's scar knew too well, the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. It was the getting out that nearly killed them, because they were not the only ones who had found the room. One of Voldemort's young followers, a sneering boy who had trailed them on his master's orders, loosed a curse he could not control to stop them taking the prize, a gout of cursed fire, fiendfire that took on the shapes of beasts and ate the city of lost things alive, racing toward the children faster than they could run, a wall of living flame that no shield could hold. And Hermione Granger Potter, with the fire taking the shape of a serpent the size of a train and lunging for them, did the thing she did best, which was not to panic but to think fast at the speed the moment demanded. She had read everything about that room, everything, and she knew there had been brooms in the wreckage 2 aisles back, and she had Harry by the collar and was shouting the location before the serpent of fire had finished forming. And Harry, who could fly the way his grandfather had flown, who went quiet and certain in the air, got them both onto an abandoned broom and up, over the closing jaws of the fire, the diadem clutched to Hermione's chest. The one who had loosed the fiendfire screaming somewhere below as his own curse turned on him, and out through the door a half-second before the room sealed itself and burned the Horcrux out of the diadem in fire fierce enough to do the family's work for them. They came out into the corridor and fell against the wall, scorched and gasping and alive, the diadem in Hermione's hands gone cold and silent and dead, the soul fragment in it consumed, and they looked at each other, sooty and wild-eyed and 16, and started helplessly to laugh, the laugh of people who have cheated death together so many times it has begun to be the great private joke of their lives. 4, Hermione managed. That's 4. Diary, ring, locket, diadem. You found brooms in a burning maze in under a second, Harry said, from memory, while being chased by a fire snake. I read the room, Hermione said with enormous dignity, exactly as she had once said it's raining at the age of 6, and Harry kissed the top of her sooty head before he could think better of it, the first time he had ever done such a thing, and they both went very still, and then because there was a war on and a rule about waiting, they did not do anything else. They only sat against the wall holding hands with a dead Horcrux between them, 2 hunters now, equal to the work, and let their hearts slow. And one more vessel, the one they did not write on the wall, the one behind their son's scar, with the war narrowing toward its end and the thing in Harry's forehead, the last great problem the family had not solved. Because they had been so sure for years that Lily's love magic was dissolving it, that the home they had built was wearing the splinter down, that by the end there would be a clean way to lift it out. And it was thinning, Lily's research said so, the link weaker than it had been, the dreams rarer. But it was not gone, and as Lord Voldemort walked the world again in his stolen body, hunting the children who hunted his soul, the family came at last in the final spring to the question they had deferred since a hospital bed 16 years before, the question Dumbledore had once believed had only one terrible answer. How do you take the last piece of him out of a living boy, when the only sure way anyone has ever found to destroy a Horcrux is to destroy the thing that holds it? Lily Potter stood in front of the wall of the war in the second-floor study, with 16 years of work pinned across 3 walls and her family asleep around the house and the answer still missing from the center of it, and she did the thing she had done at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a baby asleep upstairs and the whole clever world telling her it could not be done. She read it again. She looked for the loophole. Because there was always a loophole, she had built her entire life on it, and she would not be, she refused absolutely to be, the mother who could turn a curse for every child in the world except her own. There was a way, she was almost sure there was a way. And she thought, looking at the dates on the wall, looking at the gathering dark outside the window, looking at the embodied enemy closing in, perhaps one more spring to find it. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Everything we built. Lily found the loophole in the last week of the spring. The children turned 17, at the kitchen table, at 2 in the morning, exactly where she had found the first one. She had been at the wall of the war for 16 years, and at the worst line of it, the one she would not write in red because writing it made it real, for 16 years. How do you take the last piece of him out of a living boy, when the only sure way to destroy a Horcrux is to destroy the thing that holds it? She had read every dark book Britain could be made to surrender. She had corresponded under false names with curse breakers in 3 countries. And in the end the answer was not in any of the books, because the answer was the thing she already knew, the thing she had proven in a nursery before she understood it, and had spent 16 years failing to recognize because she kept looking for it in the wrong language. She came up the stairs and woke James with her hand on his shoulder, and her face in the candlelight was the face she had worn the morning he woke in St. Mungo's, and she said, "I've got it, James, I've had it the whole time. I turned his curse once because love is the loophole, and I've spent 16 years thinking I had to find some new and clever magic to take the splinter out of Harry, and there isn't any. There was never going to be any. It's the same loophole. It was always going to be the same loophole." He sat up. "Tell me." So she told him at the kitchen table, with the fire she had lit because she had been first down, in the manner she liked, one fact set down before the next. "The fragment in Harry is a piece of soul with no body of its own," she said. "It survives by hiding in his. It cannot be cut out with a knife or burned out with fiend fire because there is no way to burn it that doesn't burn Harry. Everyone who has ever studied this has hit that wall, including Albus, and they all drew the same conclusion, that the vessel has to die. But they were all asking the same wrong question. They were asking how to destroy the fragment. And the answer to that question is you can't, not without losing him." She put her hand flat on the table. "But that was never the question. The question is, how do you make the fragment leave? And a soul fragment will leave a vessel for exactly one reason, James, the same reason a parasite leaves a body, when the body becomes uninhabitable, when it fills up with the one thing the parasite cannot survive." "Love," James said. "Love," Lily said. "We've been doing it for 16 years without knowing the mechanism. The dreams getting rarer, the link getting weaker. We thought we were sheltering him, we were starving it. Every ordinary warm morning, every scorched pancake, every time one of us squeezed his hand 3 times, we have been filling him up with a thing that has no room left in it for Tom Riddle, and the splinter has been shrinking the whole time, cornered, dying by inches in the warmest house in Britain. It is nearly gone, James. It is so nearly gone, and there is a way to finish it, a thing I can build, a ward like the one in the nursery but turned the other way, so that the next time Voldemort strikes at Harry, the next time he sends death at our son as he did in Godric's Hollow, the curse will pass through Harry and find the only thing in him that is still Tom Riddle, the splinter, and destroy that and leave Harry, because Harry will be armored in exactly the substance the splinter is dying of." Her eyes were bright and terrible and certain. He turns his own curse into the knife that cuts himself out of our son. He does the surgery for us, and the only price is that we have to stand there and let him aim death at our child and trust the thing we have built for 17 years to hold." James was quiet for a long moment. The fire ticked. Outside, the rowan moved against the gray before dawn. "It held in the nursery," he said. "It held in the nursery, and he's mortal now, or he will be. Cup and snake, and there's nothing left anchoring him, and if the curse turns the way it turned the first time, then it kills him," Lily said, "for good, the way it should have the first time, except the first time he had 6 other pieces of himself stashed around the country. Take those away, turn his curse, and there's nothing to flee to. He dies in the dirt like the mortal man he spent his whole life refusing to be." She reached across the table and took her husband's ruined hand. "It's the same night, James. It's Godric's hollow again, the whole of it, the curse and the love and the turning. We just get to be ready this time. We get to choose the ground. And this time, when it's over, we don't wake up in a hospital. This time we go home, all of us, and we light the fire, and it's finally done." They told Harry in the morning, the whole of it, because the days of doing the fear behind a shut door were 17 years gone. And Harry, who had grown into exactly the secure and certain young man his parents had built, who had a girl waiting on the other side of the war and a family that had never once let him carry the heaviest thing alone, listened to the plan that required him to stand still and let Lord Voldemort aim death at his heart. And when his mother finished, he was quiet a moment, and then he said, "So I have to trust you." "Yes," Lily said, "that's the whole plan. You build the ward and I stand there, and I trust that the thing you've all been pouring into me my whole life is stronger than his curse. That's the whole plan." Harry looked around the kitchen, at his father with the tremor in his hand, at his mother who had turned a curse, at the window where the rowan stood, at Hermione in the doorway who had not said a word because she trusted Lily Potter with the same total faith she trusted gravity. And he smiled, the secure smile, his father's smile with none of the cold in it. "Easiest thing anyone's ever asked me," he said. "I've been trusting you my whole life, why stop now?" The cup they took from the goblin's bank in the dark of the moon, the family and a handful of the order, and it was a wild and roaring business, a dragon and a flooded vault and a run for their lives through the marble hall, but they took it, and they destroyed it on the floor of Gringotts itself with a basilisk fang, and the cup screamed and died, and that left 2, the snake and the splinter. And both of those, the family knew, would only be reachable when Voldemort came to them, which meant the war had narrowed at last to a single place and a single night, and the place was Hogwarts, and the night was coming fast. The night before the gates broke, the family had one quiet hour, and they spent it the way they had spent 10,000 others, which was the whole of what they were fighting to keep. They were in the castle by then, in a tower room the Order had made their own, and the others had gone to their posts, and for 1 hour it was just the 6 of them, James and Lily and Sirius and Remus and the 2 who were not children anymore. Lily made tea on a conjured flame because Lily made tea the way other people prayed. Remus broke out chocolate, of course, and Sirius told a story about James at 19 that James loudly disputed and did not actually deny. And for a while nobody mentioned the army gathering in the dark beyond the wards, because Lily had declared an amnesty, 1 hour, and they obeyed her the way they always obeyed her on the things that mattered. It was Harry who broke it near the end, because Harry had inherited his mother's refusal to leave a true thing unsaid. "If it goes wrong tomorrow," he said into the warm quiet, and the room went still and he pushed on, because his parents had taught him to be brave and loud. "If the ward doesn't hold, I want to have said it first. I'm not scared, I want you to know that. I grew up in the most loved house in Britain, and whatever happens out there, he can't take that off me. It already happened, it's already mine. So I'm not scared, I'm just grateful, that's all." I wanted to say it while everyone was in the room. Nobody could speak for a moment. Then Lily crossed the room and took her son's face in both her hands, the face she had crawled across a ruined nursery to reach, and she said, "It's going to hold. I built it out of 17 years of you. It's going to hold." And James gripped his shoulder, and Sirius cuffed him round the head to keep from doing something worse, and Remus pressed chocolate into his hand, and Hermione last took the hand that wasn't holding chocolate and squeezed it 3 times, "I'm here," and held on, and did not let go for the rest of the hour, and Harry sat in the warm tower room surrounded by every person he loved in the world and was, against all sense, on the eve of the worst battle of the war, entirely at peace. When the wards broke at dusk the next day, the family went down to meet it the way they had decided, 17 years before in a hospital bed, to meet everything. Not scattered, not protected, together, back to back, a fist with no gaps in it. It came on the first warm evening of May. Voldemort brought everything he had to the gates of the school, because his servants had at last run the family to ground there, and because he had understood, in the cold hours, the thing that was being done to him, and he meant to end the Potters and their meddling and their love before the list that was unmaking him could reach its final lines. He brought his Death Eaters and his giants and his army of the drowned and his great snake coiled in its shimmering cage of protection at his side, and he broke the ancient wards of Hogwarts one by one in the dusk while the school made itself ready behind them, and the last battle of the long war began. The family did not fight, it scattered. That was the thing Voldemort never understood and never could, the thing that had beaten him for 17 years. They fought it together, a fist with no gaps, and around them they had gathered the others who fought the same way, and so the defense of Hogwarts was not 100 lonely duels but a thing with a shape, a thing with people watching each other's corners, and it held far longer than it had any right to. It held, but it cost. The family did not lie to themselves about the cost, then or after. The war took good people that night, people whose names the survivors would speak at tables for the rest of their lives. An Order member who had stood guard over a cottage in the rain 17 years before, and stood guard again now and did not come back from it. A young witch barely out of school who died holding a corridor so that the younger students could reach the boats. Brave dead, honored dead, the price of a war that the Potters had spent 17 years trying to make as small as love could make it, and had not been able to make nothing. Remus took a curse holding the West Bridge and went down and got up again gray and bleeding, and held it anyway. Sirius fought back to back with James the way they had at 21, the two of them laughing in the dark the way men laugh when laughing is the only thing left that the enemy cannot take, and they held the courtyard and they did not fall, because Lily was a step behind them keeping everyone she had decided to keep, which was all of them, which was the only way she knew how to fight. The battle for the castle was the longest night of all their lives, and they fought it the way the family fought everything, which was the thing that won it. Harry and Hermione fought side by side the whole of it, the way they had done everything since they were 6, two hunters now, 17 and lethal and wordless, his wand and hers moving in a partnership so old it had stopped needing language. He watched the corners, she read the field. When a knot of masked figures broke through the second-floor cloister and would have flanked the defenders holding the stair, it was Hermione who saw it forming and Hermione who brought half a corridor of enchanted ceiling down across the gap to seal it, calm in the center of the chaos as she had been under a trolls club at 11, the cleverest person on the field and the most dangerous because of it. And when the dust of it cleared and a curse came for her out of the smoke from behind, it was Harry who was already there, already turning, as he was always already there, and the two of them stood back to back in the wreck of the cloister and held it and did not fall, because neither of them had ever once intended to let the other one stand alone. The Order held the bridges and the courtyards and the long galleries, and they held them at a cost the family would carry forever. Daedalus Diggle, who had bowed to a baby in a shop 17 years before, held the North Bridge until the younger students were across it and did not come back. A girl of 19 named Lavender, barely out of the school herself, fell holding a doorway so that the third years behind her could reach the boats, and the family said her name at their table every year after because that was the only immortality the Potters believed in, the kind that lives in the mouths of the people you saved. The war took its price in the dark, precise and pitiless, and the family did not look away from it, then or after, because looking away from the cost was a thing Tom Riddle did, and they had spent 17 years being the opposite of him in every particular. Remus took a slashing curse on the West Bridge that opened his shoulder to the bone and went down, and got up, gray and streaming, and held the bridge anyway, because there were children behind it, and a man who has spent his whole life being feared for the monster in him will hold a bridge to the death to prove, one last time, what he actually is. Sirius reached him and the two of them held it together, the wolf and the dog, the last of the marauders standing in the wreckage of a war that had started before either of them understood it, and they held and they lived, both of them, which was its own small miracle in a night with few of them to spare. And James and Lily fought in the courtyard at the heart of it, the duelist who had been broken at 21 and the witch who had turned a curse, and around them the defense had a shape it had nowhere else, because everywhere Lily Potter stood, people who should have died did not, and everywhere James Potter stood, the line did not break. They had been preparing for this night for 17 years, in a study with a wall full of relics, and now that it had come they met it without flinching. A married pair fighting back to back in the dawn, keeping each other and everyone they could reach, narrowing the long catastrophe of the war down, blow by blow, toward the single point where it would end, which was their son and the thing that had come to kill him, and the love they had spent his whole life weaving into a wall. And Nagini died at the hands of the one person nobody had marked as dangerous, which was its own kind of justice. Neville Longbottom, round-faced and nervous, who had lost his toad on the train 7 years before and been found a friend for life by a girl who could not leave a problem unsolved, stood his ground in the courtyard when the great snake came for the wounded, and he did not run, and when the sorting hat came to him out of the smoke the way it had come to Harry in the chamber, and the silver sword of Gryffindor fell into his trembling hands. Neville Longbottom swung it with all the courage his quiet years had been quietly storing up, and took the head off the last anchor but one of Lord Voldemort, and the snake died screaming in 2 pieces on the stones, and a piece of the Dark Lord's soul went out of the world with it. One left, after that there was only one left. Harry felt the snake die through his scar, a lessening, the enemy growing thinner, and he knew the moment had come, and he went to find it as he had always known he would, not alone, never alone, but with his family at his back and a plan 17 years in the building, and his mother's ward woven into his own skin like a second name. Voldemort was waiting in the courtyard in the ring of his fallen wards, and the fighting fell back from the two of them the way water falls back from a thrown stone. And for a moment Harry and the thing that had come to kill him at Godric's Hollow stood and looked at each other across the bloodied stones in the first grey light of morning, the whole war breathing around them, the family at the edges of it, close, watching, ready, holding. "They have armored you well, your pets," Voldemort said. His high voice had a crack in it now, the crack of a thing diminished, a thing that could feel its own anchors gone. The mother who would not die, the father who would not die. I have hunted your whole family for 17 years and you have slipped me at every turn, and now there's nothing left of you to hunt but this, one curse, one boy. I have spent better part of my immortality preparing to be the thing that walks away from this, and I find, Harry Potter, that I no longer entirely believe I will. Tell me before I kill you, what did your mother do to me that night? What is the trick of you? And Harry Potter, 17, standing where his father had stood with empty hands, looked at the mortal thing in front of him and gave it the only answer there had ever been. "It's not a trick," he said. "It's just that they love me, and you never had that, and you spent your whole life thinking it made me weak." "This is my house," he said, because his father had said it, because it was the truest sentence the family had, "and these are my people, and you came to the wrong place for the last time. Go on then, do the thing you came to do. I've been ready for it since before I could walk." Voldemort raised the yew wand, the brother of the holly, in Harry's hand, and he aimed death at the heart of the child he had failed to kill for 17 years, and he spoke the words that had ended 1,000 lives, the green light leaping from the wand toward Harry's chest, and Harry Potter did the hardest thing his parents had ever asked of him. He stood still. He did not raise his wand. He trusted them. And the ward woke. 16 years Lily Potter had been building it, in scorched pancakes and saved seats, and the fire lit every morning, and a final desperate fortnight weaving the last of it into her son's own blood. And now, with the killing curse a hand's breadth from Harry's heart, it woke the way the nursery ward had woken, and it recognized what it had been built to recognize. And the green light passed into Harry and could not touch him because he was made of the one thing it could not kill, and it found instead the splinter. The last cornered dying scrap of Tom Riddle hiding behind the scar, and it fell on that with the whole annihilating weight of a killing curse, meeting a thing with no protection of its own at all. The fragment died. It came apart behind Harry's eyes with a scream only Harry could hear. The passenger of 17 years burned out of him in a single instant, and Harry felt it go, felt his own mind become, for the first time he could remember, wholly and entirely his own, and the relief of it and the force of it drove him to his knees on the bloodied stones, gasping, alive, whole, emptied at last of the thing that had ridden behind his scar since he was 15 months old. And the curse, having destroyed the only thing in that courtyard it could destroy, did what it had done once before in a nursery. It turned. Folded back along the line of its own intent, the way it had 17 years ago, hunting the one who had cast it, and this time there was no army of Horcruxes waiting to catch the fleeing soul, no relics, no diary, no ring, no locket, no cup, no diadem, no snake, no splinter behind a child's scar, nothing, nothing at all, because the patient love of one stubborn family had spent 17 years working through the list a line at a time, until there was only Tom Riddle himself, mortal. Alone, exactly as mortal as the orphan he had been before he tore himself apart to escape it. The curse came home, and Lord Voldemort, who had made himself deathless and was deathless no longer, met the whole of it and fell and did not rise and was, this time, finally and completely and forever gone. James Potter reached his son a half-second after the curse turned, as he had been a half-second too late once before and had sworn never to be again. And he got there in time this time to catch Harry as he went down, to get his arms around his son on the bloodied stones as he had in a burning chamber once. And a falling Death Eater's last wild curse caught James across the back as he bent over Harry, and laid him open, and he went down too over his son, shielding him to the last out of pure unbreakable habit, and bled onto the stones of the courtyard where the war had ended. But he did not die. Lily was there. Lily was always there. She had her hands in the wound before James had finished falling, pouring the impossible refusal into him that she had poured into Dumbledore and Sirius, and everyone she had ever decided was not allowed to leave her. And she kept him, as she kept all of them, by main force and love and the loophole that had defeated death 3 times now, and would not be denied a 4th. James Potter bled badly and scarred worse and walked with 2 canes instead of 1 for the rest of his life, and he counted it the cheapest price he had ever paid for anything, because when he opened his eyes in the gray morning with his wife's hands holding his life inside him, the first thing he saw was his son, kneeling over him, whole and clear-eyed and free. The scar on his forehead faded to a thin white line that would never hurt again, and his daughter beside him gripping Harry's hand. And the courtyard quiet, and the long war over, and his whole family, every last one of them, the whole and the broken and the mended, alive in the first light of the morning after. Did we win? James croaked, because it was Sirius's line, because the family had earned the right to make a joke of it. We won, Harry said, and put his forehead down against his father's, the way the Potters did, and held on. The sun came up over a quiet courtyard. That was the thing none of them ever forgot, the survivors, the ones who lived to tell it at tables for 50 years, how ordinary the dawn was. How the birds started up in the trees beyond the broken wall as though nothing had happened, as though the longest night of the age had not just ended on those stones. And the light came across the courtyard, the plain gray gold of any May morning, and touched the fallen and the standing alike without preference, the way light does, and the war was simply over, the way a storm is simply over, with wet stone and bird song and people standing about not yet able to believe the sky had stopped falling. They came out of the castle slowly, the defenders, the ones still on their feet, into the strange new quiet. Pomfrey and the healers moved among the wounded. Sirius came across the courtyard half carrying Remus, the two of them gray and bloody and grinning the helpless grins of men who had expected to die and somehow had not. Ron found his family in the rubble, all of them, every red head accounted for, and sat down hard in the middle of them and wept without shame. Neville stood over the two pieces of a dead snake with a sword too big for him and a look on his round face of a person discovering, at 17, exactly how much he had always had in him. And in the center of it, Harry knelt on the stones beside his father, who was alive, who Lily would not let be otherwise, her hands buried in the wound in his back and her whole fierce will poured into keeping him, and Harry held his father's hand while she worked and felt where his scar had been nothing. No ache, no cold draft from a fireless room, no passenger, only the thin white line of an old wound that would never trouble him again, and behind it, for the whole of the rest of his life, only and entirely himself. Hermione reached him through the wreckage. He felt her before he saw her, as he always had, and he got up off the stones, and they stood facing each other in the gray-gold light with the war finished around them, two people who had loved each other since they were 6 years old and held a frozen promise between them for 2 years, made on a cold balcony, sworn on 3 squeezed fingers. When it's over. When that thing is out of your scar and he's dead and gone and we're just two ordinary people with our whole lives in front of us and nothing chasing us, then I'll let myself, then I'll let us, it was over. The thing was out of his scar, he was dead and gone, there was nothing chasing them and there never would be again, and they were of age and the whole rest of their lives stood open in front of them in the light of the first morning of the rest of the world. It's over, Harry said. His voice was not quite steady. Me, it's actually over. I know, Hermione said, I always know, it's insufferable. Then come here, he said, because I have been waiting 11 years to do this and 2 years on purpose, and I am completely done waiting. And Hermione Granger-Potter, who had walked into his life soaked to the skin in a doorway holding a dragon book like a shield, closed the last of the distance between them, and they kissed for the first time in the broken courtyard in the light of the morning after. While the birds sang in the ruined trees and the family they had built and bled for and never once let go of stood around them, exhausted and alive, and did not look away, because some things you have earned the right to witness, and a family that has held the line together for 17 years has earned the right to see how the story ends. It ended with a kiss in the sunrise. Sirius, of course, cheered. Sirius would have been disappointed in himself if he hadn't. The years did the thing years do in a happy house, which is to pass and to be good and to be had. They rebuilt, as people do. The war's dead were mourned and named and never forgotten, and the war's wounds healed where they could and were carried with grace where they couldn't, and the wizarding world, which had spent the better part of 2 decades holding its breath, slowly remembered how to let it out. The Potters went home to Devon, to the rambling stone house with the rowan at the bottom of the garden and the lopsided treehouse and the green chair by the library window, and they filled it, the way they had always filled it, with books and chaos and the smell of wood smoke and cinnamon and the sound of someone reading aloud. Harry and Hermione waited until the war was a year gone, and not a day more, because Sirius had told Harry on a night he nearly died not to let a single ordinary morning go by unsaid. They were married under the rowan tree on the Tuesday nearest the anniversary of the day the rain stopped, which Hermione chose and no one needed to ask why, and James told the story at the wedding, the whole embellished glory of it, the wet drive to Bristol and the girl in the doorway with her dragon book and her cat's box. And by now it had 6 dragons and a sea serpent, and there was not one true fact left in it except the only one that mattered. Which was that a family had gone out in the rain one day and come home with a daughter, and that the daughter had grown up to marry the son, and that the two of them had loved each other since they were 6 years old and had simply, finally, made it official in front of everyone they loved. They were not brother and sister, they never had been. They had been something the language did not have a clean word for, and they had spent their lives being asked to choose a word, and in the end they had chosen the one that fit, and it was a good word, and they wore it well. Albus Dumbledore lived to see it end, which he had never expected to do, and he lived a good while after, his blackened hand notwithstanding long enough to dance badly, with his ruined hand held carefully behind his back, at the wedding under the rowan tree. He came to the house sometimes in the years after, an old man with a withered hand and a great deal to atone for and the grace at last to know it. He and Lily would sit in the library in the green chair and the one across from it, and talk the deep strange shop of the magic they had each bent past its limits, and once, near the end of his life, he said to her, "I spent 100 years certain that the heaviest things must be carried alone, that to love was to expose a flank. And a family in Devon proved me wrong by refusing, for 17 years, to let go of a single one of their own." He looked at the wall where the map of the war had hung, taken down now, the space of it a little brighter than the wallpaper around it. "You did not just defeat him, Lily, you disproved him. You took the thesis of his entire monstrous life, that love is weakness, and you buried it under your own kitchen table. I was his opposite in power, you were his opposite in truth. Only one of those things turned out to matter." He smiled, the old twinkle, the steel finally laid down. "I am glad, more than I can say, that I lived long enough to be your student. I was a poor one, but I did in the end learn the lesson, love close. It only took me a century and a half." He died in his sleep a few years on, old and unburdened, and the family kept his name at their table with the others, the honored dead and the honored living both, because the Potters had never been able to tell the difference between the people they had lost and the people they had loved, and had long since stopped trying. They built their grown lives the way they had built everything, side by side, and they built them out of the things the house in Devon had taught them. Hermione went into the law, of all places, into the dusty machinery of the ministry, and the first thing she did with the power it gave her was walk down 2 floors to the cramped office that had once written retained for monitoring across the file of a frightened orphan, and rebuild it, top to bottom, into something that found lonely magical children and brought them somewhere warm, because a girl who had been very nearly lost to that system had grown up to make sure no other child ever would be. Harry trained as an Auror like his father, and was a better one, because he had been raised by a man who taught him that the whole of the job was noticing when a gate failed to creak, and that the point of all of it was never the fighting, it was the warm kitchen the fighting protected. And one wet afternoon, years into their marriage, the small, dark-haired person with Hermione's frown went rummaging in the attic of the Devon house and came down holding a battered, empty cardboard box and asked what it was for and why anyone would keep an empty box. Hermione took it from her child's hands and held it for a moment, the box she had carried out of a cold house in Bristol 30 years before, in case the cat changed its mind. "It's a hedged bet," she said at last, and her voice was not quite steady. "I packed it the worst day of my life for a cat that hated me, because I decided that hoping for something to come round was worth the cost of carrying an empty box. And then I came to live here and the box stayed empty for a very long time, but I never threw it out." She crouched down, the way her father had crouched down on a ministry lawn a lifetime before, level with her child's eyes. "Because here's the thing about hoping, love, the thing this whole family is built on. Sometimes you carry the empty box for years and nothing comes, and sometimes the rain stops and everything you ever hoped for walks in the door at once." She handed the box back. "Let's go and find something to put in it, shall we? I think it's waited long enough." They got the child a cat. It hated everyone except the child on principle, immediately and forever. The box, at last, was full. "There is a thing that happens in the green chair in the evenings in that house, and it has happened for 30 years now and will happen for 30 more. Someone reads aloud. It used to be Hermione reading to Harry on the floor at her feet, a girl thawing a frozen heart on a rainy afternoon, and then it was the two of them taking turns, a page each, arguing fiercely over the pronunciation of words they had never heard spoken. And now there is a small dark-haired person in the chair between them who has Hermione's frown and Harry's grin and a habit of correcting both of them, and the reading goes on, the oldest ritual in the house, the one that started it all. James and Lily grew old in that house, which was a thing neither of them had ever expected to do, having both lain near death on the same night before they were 22. James walks the garden with his 2 canes and tells terrible stories to anyone who will hold still, and Lily sits in the kitchen with her tea and tastes the soup off the back of a spoon and adds things from jars without measuring, by instinct and old habit, and the fire is still lit each morning by whoever rises first, so that the others, coming after, always walk into somewhere warm. Sirius is godfather now to a new generation and corrupts them on schedule. Remus, gray and gentle and finally mostly at peace, keeps the chocolate stocked, and on the full moons the family still keeps the watch, all of them, because some rituals you do not give up just because the danger has passed, because the rituals were never really about the danger, they were about the watching, the staying, the being there. On the most recent day the rain stopped, the whole sprawling family of them gathered under the rowan tree, the old and the young, the whole and the scarred, 3 generations of a house that had been built out of nothing on a wet Tuesday by a boy who held out his hand and a girl who decided to take it. And at some point in the afternoon, the small, dark-haired person with Hermione's frown climbed into Harry's lap and asked him, the way children do, to tell the scary story again. The one about the bad man and the night he came, and Harry Potter looked down at his child and then over at his wife, and then at his parents grown old in the sun, alive all of them, against every rule of the war that should have made them a name on a stone, and he thought about how to tell it. He decided to tell it true. Not the dragons, the true one. A long time ago, Harry said, before you were born, a bad man came to hurt our family, and he was the most powerful wizard in the world, and we were just a family, and everyone thought we'd lose. He tucked a wild strand of dark hair behind a small ear, the gesture his father had made 1,000 times. But here's the thing about us, the thing the bad man never understood, the thing that beat him in the end. He thought love made you weak. He spent his whole life proving it, and he was wrong. It was the strongest thing there ever was, and we had more of it than anyone, and we never once let go of each other, not for 17 years, not for anything. He looked up and found Hermione watching him, and she squeezed his hand 3 times where the child could not see. And that's how the story ends, love, not with a spell, with a family that wouldn't let go. Now, who wants to hear the version with the dragons? The child wanted the version with the dragons. The child always wanted the version with the dragons. And so James Potter, old in the sun, hauled himself up on his 2 canes and began to tell it. The wet drive to Bristol, the girl in the doorway, the 6 dragons and the sea serpent, and the heroic role he had invented for himself decades ago and would defend to his grave. And the whole family settled in under the rowan tree to listen to the oldest story they had, the true one wearing its costume of dragons, while the afternoon went gold around them, and the soup waited on the stove and the fire. Somewhere inside kept the rooms warm against the evening, and not one of them, not a single one, was a name on a stone. Chapter 7 End.